Chapter 475. The Divine Ancestor had once said that when Tiandu was in danger, the formation could be activated to ensure the continuation of Tiandu's inheritance. Although the Sun-Moon-Star formation was very powerful, the most crucial part of it was obviously that seemingly useless Khanate Supreme Treasure, the sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. In addition, there were many different opinions about the origin of this Khanate Supreme Treasure within Tiandu. Some said it was the Divine Ancestor's natal magic treasure, while others said it was inadvertently found in the depths of the void. As for which was true and which was false, perhaps only the Divine Ancestor himself knew. Successive celestial venerables had carefully studied the soul mirror, but no one could discover any secrets from it. Over time, this Khanate Supreme Treasure was completely reduced to a useless decoration. Yuhuan Tianzuan was ambitious and naturally would not easily believe that the soul mirror was useless. From the day he became a celestial venerable, he had been constantly thinking about how to take the soul mirror for his own use. In order to achieve this goal, Yuhuan Tianzuan had even flipped through all the ancient records related to the Divine Ancestor. In addition to some obviously official biographies, he had even searched for many unofficial histories from the people. Thus, Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually understood some of the secrets of the ancient times. What needed to be mentioned here was that as long as there was political power, there would inevitably be opponents. Tiandu was no exception. The Divine Ancestor was not a national treasure and could not be liked by everyone, so it was inevitable that there would be some thieves with evil intentions spreading rumors to slander the Divine Ancestor. It was from these traitors that Yuhuan Tianzuan had obtained this unofficial history that was close to a rumor. According to the unofficial records, the Divine Ancestor was not as glorious and great as people imagined. Instead, he was an out-and-out hypocrite, 10,000 times more disgusting than Mount Hua. History was always written by the victors. 10,000 years had passed, so how much of the past could the people of later generations remember? Wasn't it still just reading the ancient records left behind by the predecessors? In the official history, the Divine Ancestor's greatness did not need to be repeated, because he had long become a god, worshipped by everyone in Tiandu. But in this unofficial history, the image of the grand pure Divine Ancestor was completely different from what everyone knew before. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled, he still had the heart of 5 poisons that everyone had: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. It was precisely because of this that the Grand Pure One in the unofficial history was no longer a flawless ancient myth. Instead, he was more like a living person. In fact, whether it was official history or unofficial history, these were all written by people who had come before them. As long as it was recorded by someone, it would definitely have a certain degree of subjectivity. Not to mention, this unofficial history that could be said to be treasonous came from the Jiang clan's ancestor, that had long since been listed as a sinner. The ancestors of the Jiang clan had always been enemies of Tiandu, so it was naturally impossible for them to respect the Divine Ancestor like the common people of Tiandu did. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan originally did not take these fabricated unofficial histories seriously. It was not until the destruction of Tiandu that Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly woke up. Could it be that the contents of this unofficial history were true? Unofficial history? Show it to me. Hearing this, Chunxi's gossipy soul couldn't help but burn up. Just like how modern people were always full of curiosity about ancient emperors, such a stunning figure like the Grand Pure One would naturally make Chunxi yearn for him. He couldn't help but want to learn more from the mouths of others. After hearing Chunxi's words, Yuhuan Tianzuan hesitated. After all, he was the head of the 10 celestial venerables, and the current actual ruler of Tiandu. Wasn't the act of slandering the Divine Ancestor the same as smearing feces on him? Could it be that he had to praise, well smeared, so fragrant? Hurry up, what are you dawdling for? Just show it to me. I'm not a person of Tiandu. Are you afraid that I'll rebel after seeing it? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan was somewhat hesitant, Chunxi kept urging him. There was no other way. Yuhuan Tianzuan really couldn't persuade Chunxi. He could only take out a palm-sized jade slip from his mustard seed bag, with a hesitant expression. The so-called jade slip was the carrier that cultivators used to record important information. The content was neither words nor sound, but consciousness. Chen Shi snatched the jade slip from Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand and poured his divine sense into it. The information recorded in the jade slip immediately poured into his mind. Interesting. After silently digesting the information in the jade slip, the corners of Chen Shi's mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Just as Yuhuan Tianzuan said, the information in the jade slip was filled with a large amount of slandering of the Grand Pure One sacred ancestor. However, after excluding these slanderous words, the most important information was actually about the ancestor of the Jiang clan. Although the Jiang clan was very weak now, in ancient times, the ancestor of the Jiang clan and the Grand Pure One sacred ancestor were fellow disciples. The Grand Pure One sacred ancestor was so amazing. As his junior brother, how weak could the ancestor of the Jiang clan be? This even Jiang Yan didn't know much about. The name of the sect that the Grand Pure One sacred ancestor belonged to was no longer known, but there was no doubt that the earth of that era was indeed very powerful, far surpassing the current Tianxian. Of course, the earth at that time wasn't called Earth, but was called Dubhe Realm. In short, it was an era where heroes came forth in large numbers. If it wasn't for the sudden depletion of the spirit chi of heaven and earth, there probably wouldn't be any modern humans. Logically speaking, since the ancestor of the Jiang clan and the Grand Pure One sacred ancestor were fellow disciples, how could his descendants be labeled as sinners by the sacred ancestor? There must be some secret hidden within, but this jade slip didn't record it in detail. Other than some meaningless slander, Chen Shi couldn't find a single useful piece of information. This kind of feeling was like someone exposing a celebrity's scandals on the internet. No matter what the rumor mongers said, how could they convince people without concrete evidence? Chen Shi held the jade slip in his hand and rubbed it carefully, as if he was thinking about something. One had to know that jade slips had always been used to record important information. How could they only record some baseless slander? In the words of the netizens, that was, how could there be no real evidence? Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but pour his divine sense into the jade slip again, and try to find some useful information from it. This time, he looked very carefully. He carefully studied the jade slip from the inside to the outside. And it was precisely because of this that Chen Shi actually managed to find a seal in the seemingly ordinary jade slip. This seal was very strange. It actually contained some of the true meaning of the word void, so that others couldn't discover its existence at all. In other words, only cultivators at the Dongxi realm could successfully read its contents. Yuhuan Tianzuan's cultivation was only at the mid-deity transformation stage, so even if the jade slip had been in his hands all this time, he didn't know that there were other contents hidden in the jade slip. Therefore, the moment Chen Shi discovered this seal, he already realized what he was about to uncover could be a shocking secret that had been covered in dust for tens of thousands of years. Chapter 476. The information in the jade slip was transmitted through consciousness. Therefore, from Chen Shi unlocking the seal to him knowing all the contents in it, all this happened in the blink of an eye. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan's cultivation couldn't be compared with Chen Shi's, but at that moment, he was still keenly aware of a slight expression change on Chen Shi's face. What's wrong? One had to know that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not an easy person to deal with. So this old guy immediately pretended to be concerned and asked, "Did you find any problems?" "Nothing. I just feel that the empty slander above is a bit funny." Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan tried to discover something from Chen Shi's face, but Chen Shi merely smiled and shook his head. Then he pretended to be at ease and threw the jade slip back to Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan. After Yuhuan Tianzuan took the jade slip, he quickly checked it with his divine thought. After confirming that there was nothing strange in it, he was slightly relieved. "Okay, that's it for today. I have to go back and pick up the children from school. You stay here and preside over the reconstruction work of Tiandu. If you guys perform well, maybe I'll consider accepting your immigration application. But before that, you all stay here obediently. You are not allowed to go anywhere. Once I find out that you are trying to escape from here, I think you should be very clear about the consequences." After Chen Shi gave a series of orders in a bureaucratic tone, the expression on Emperor Yuhuan's face was marvelous. "Are you really treating us as captives?" Yuhuan Tianzuan cursed in his heart. But due to Chunxi's abuse of power, he could only snort softly and vent the dissatisfaction in his heart. Chunxi left the moon. But he did not immediately return to the courtyard, but flew aimlessly outside the atmosphere, looking at the boundless starry sky while silently sorting out the information he got from the jade slip. The information in the jade slip could be divided into two parts. On the surface, the content was to insult the Grand Pure One and slander him. The content hidden under the seal was a complete description of what had happened in the past from the perspective of a bystander. There was too much information in the jade slip. In addition, the person who left the jade slip didn't have a very firm position, so Chunxi could only sort it out bit by bit. First of all, it could be concluded that the contents of the two sections were not left by the same person. Chunxi guessed that it was very likely that the true owner of the jade slip was a descendant of the Jiang clan's ancestor, or even a close relative within 3 generations. In other words, it was in existence like a son, grandson, disciple, or grand disciple. The hidden content under the seal was left behind by this person. As for the content outside the seal, there was a high probability that it was randomly added by the descendants of the Jiang clan. They didn't know what had happened back then, so they could only try their best to slander the sacred ancestor. From this, it could be seen that the Jiang clan's ancestor did not tell his descendants everything that happened back then. Thinking about it, this was also a form of protection. According to the records in the jade slip, the Grand Pure One and the Jiang clan's ancestor were indeed from the same sect. At that time, the overall strength of the heaven's pivot realm was very powerful. According to the description in the jade slip, the Grand Pure One and the Jiang clan's ancestor had already reached the legendary half-saint realm. Half-saint? Chunxi pondered for a long time before he made a rough judgment in his heart. Yuanying was equivalent to a divine general. Soul formation was equivalent to a heavenly venerable. Insightful void was equivalent to a supreme. The owner of the jade slip was a supreme. Then the Grand Pure One, who could be called a half-saint by him, should at least be a big shot at the Tao integration stage, right? Thinking of this, Chunxi lowered his head to look at the azure planet again. He was slightly excited and could not calm down. Earth was still the same Earth. However, the Earth of that era was completely different from the Earth of today. As the saying goes, heroes are created by the times. That era was simply a glorious era where stars gathered and heroes emerged in large numbers. But unfortunately, no matter how good the era was, it would eventually come to an end. As the spirit chi on Earth began to weaken rapidly, the glory of the heavens' pivot realm was no longer the same as before. The ancient immortal cultivators had no choice but to start looking for a new cultivation holy land in order to continue their legacy. Just like in sci-fi movies, once the apocalypse arrived, everyone would make different choices. Thus, some people proposed to give up on the heavens' pivot realm. With the half-saint as the leader, they would lead everyone across the void and find another place to live in the universe. In today's words, this group of people were typical radicals. This was because at least at the golden core stage could fly. Only at the Yuanying stage could one live freely in the universe for a long time. Since they could make such a suggestion, it actually meant that they wanted to give up on cultivators below the Yuanying stage. What kind of terrifying suggestion was this? Who didn't have relatives, friends, parents, and relatives in their life? Take Chunxi as an example. He was already lonely enough, but how many people above the Yuanying stage did he have by his side? Cultivation was about talent and fate. Sometimes in life, one must have it, and when not in life, one should not force it. Yuanying was not so easy to get married. Once this decision was made, it was equivalent to giving up on most people on Earth. Even if the half-saint could lead many people across the void at the same time, he could not take everyone on Earth with him. What about the rest of the people? Let them perish on their own? Thus, this suggestion was quickly rejected. Seeing this, Chunxi could not help but feel a little puzzled. Didn't Changhua and Yiji come from the Supreme Palace enclosure? Wasn't the Supreme Palace enclosure near the solar system? With the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor's realm, even if he used a stupid method that was close to moving a mountain, he could still bring everyone to the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? Could it be that the ancient immortal cultivators did not know that there was such a good place as the Supreme Palace enclosure near the solar system? She really did not understand this point. But fortunately, this question was not important, so he quickly put this question to the back of his mind, and then went on to sort it out. After the radical faction's suggestion was rejected, the conservative faction led by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the Jiang Ancestor proposed a compromise. That was, integrate all the forces in the Tianshu realm and send out the strongest people from each sect. Then these people would be led by a half-saint to find a suitable cultivation, holy land in the universe. After they found it, everyone would come back to discuss how to move everyone on Earth over. This suggestion was unanimously approved by everyone. At the very least, they would not just pack up and leave, right? Thus, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the others set off. But what no one expected was, when they left, they were gone for as long as 20 years. The people who stayed on Earth looked forward to the stars and the moon every day, almost always looking forward to their return. Finally, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the others returned. It was important to note that when the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor set off, his cultivation was not much different from the others. He was only a half-saint. But by the time he came back, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had stepped into an unprecedented realm. A saint. This was an extremely good thing. After all, even though the Tianshu realm was unparalleled at that time, it had been tens of thousands of years since a saint had appeared. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor's breakthrough was really good news for the ancient cultivators, who were shrouded in the shadow of doomsday. But before they could rejoice, bad news followed one after the other, and everyone was dumbfounded. Although the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had successfully entered the saint realm, the 5 half-saints and more than 10 supremes who had traveled with him had all died. Everyone was dead. Only the dying Jiang Ancestor was left. If the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had not done his best to save him, even the Jiang Ancestor would have died on the way home. At that moment, there was only one question left in everyone's hearts. How was this possible? The 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 477. No one knew what had happened to the sacred ancestor and his group in the depths of the starry sky. No matter who asked, the sacred ancestor kept his mouth shut. One had to know that the people who had traveled with him were all the top figures of the various sects and clans. These people had died in the depths of the universe without even a corpse. Naturally, their descendants could not accept this fact. As a result, the descendants of these half-step saints jointly wrote a letter, asking the sacred ancestor to give everyone a reasonable explanation. Although the sacred ancestor had given in, he did not tell everyone what had happened in the past 20 years. Instead, he gave a simple summary, saying that his group had encountered great danger in the Great Void, and that it was already a great blessing to be able to return. And then there was no more. There was not even a reasonable explanation. This time, not only the descendants of the half-step saints, but even the ordinary onlookers could not help but be puzzled. Why are you able to survive when all of your companions are dead? Moreover, you lived a better and more carefree life, and even became a saint because of this? Due to the might of a saint and the fact that all the half-step saints who could mediate with him had fallen, the sacred ancestor became the #1 person in the heavens pivot realm after returning. No one dared to question him in front of his face, but the rumors became more and more intense in private. There were even some people who made wild guesses. The sacred ancestor and his group might have discovered the immortal emperor's treasury in the depths of the universe, and the half-step saints who accompanied them died in this treasury. Opportunities were always accompanied by risks. In the moment of danger, the sacred ancestor decisively dragged everyone down with him. As a result, he obtained the immortal emperor's inheritance and became a saint in a short 20 years. Otherwise, how could one explain the sacred ancestor's sudden increase in cultivation? This kind of baseless guess was almost equivalent to slander. Even so, the sacred ancestor was still unwilling to mention the details. In desperation, everyone could only cast their gazes on the last survivor of this trip, and that was the Jiang ancestor. At this time, it was likely that only the Jiang clan's ancestor knew what exactly happened in these 20 years. But what was regrettable was that Even though the Jiang ancestor's cultivation was extraordinary, when he was brought back by the Supreme Pure One, he was already heavily injured. For immortal cultivators, physical injuries were naturally not a problem. However, the Jiang clan's ancestor did not only have injuries on his physical body, the truly fatal injury was still the injury on his soul. It was unknown what they had experienced. In short, when the Jiang ancestor was brought back by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, he was already on the verge of death, as if he had entered a state of suspended animation. Now the only survivor was in a vegetative state. As long as the Grand Pure One did not take the initiative to mention it, who would know the secret? Rumors were just rumors. One day they would collapse on their own. That was because people were forgetful. As the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor began to build the Sky Capital, and prepared to open the Sky Gate to lead everyone to the outside world, no one dared to talk about the Divine Ancestor in private anymore. It didn't matter how the Grand Pure Forefather had found the major world. Its appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, illuminating the path forward for the ancient cultivators. If he continued to spread rumors and go against the venerable ancestor, wouldn't he be digging his own grave? Therefore, other than a few people led by the Jiang clan who chose to stay in the Heaven's Pivot Realm, most of the ancient immortal cultivators followed the Taiching Divine Ancestor to the Great World. What needed to be noted here was, it was different from what Chunxi understood. It was not that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had given up on the Jiang clan, but that the Jiang clan had voluntarily chosen to stay in the lower realm. The reason why the Jiang clan had become a sinner clan was that after the Divine Ancestor passed away, the Jiang clan still refused to be disciplined by the Sky Capital. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor might not care about their crime of spreading rumors in private, because of their old friendship. However, the successor of the Sky Capital would definitely not tolerate anyone slandering the Divine Ancestor. Therefore, the Jiang clan was judged as a sinner clan. Even the heavens would not tolerate sinners. That was the main content recorded in the Jade Slip. Other than these old matters, what really attracted Chunxi's attention was actually a memory from the Jiang clan ancestor. Yes, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. No one, including the descendants of the Jiang clan, knew. Not long after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor led the ancient immortal cultivators to the Great World, the Jiang clan ancestor, who had been in the state of a living dead, actually woke up again. Logically speaking, the Jiang clan ancestor's soul had long been shattered, and there should be no possibility of him waking up. Therefore, after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor came to visit a few times, he never came again. Even a saint like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor could not save him. What method did others have to wake up the Jiang clan ancestor? But here was the strange thing. Just as the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor left, the Jiang clan ancestor actually woke up. At that time, only the owner of the Jade Slip was accompanying the Jiang clan ancestor, so the Jiang clan ancestor directly poured this memory into the mind of the owner of the Jade Slip. Then, as if he had obtained some kind of relief, the Jiang clan ancestor rode a crane to the west with a smile on his face. The last half-saint of the heavenly pivot realm fell. The Jiang clan ancestor left with a smile. However, after the owner of the Jade Slip obtained this memory, he was completely shocked by the scene in the memory. After thinking about it again and again, the owner of the Jade Slip decided to seal this past and record all the causes and effects into the Jade Slip. He set up a seal and waited for the fated person to know. Obviously, Chunxi was that fated person. Therefore, he was also shocked by this memory at that time, which was why Yuhuan Tianzuan noticed something strange. It turned out that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and his group had never left the solar system. Just as they flew to Saturn, a dark fissure suddenly appeared in the void and sucked the group of half-sages and supreme martial artists into it. It was a boundless dark space. After the Jiang clan ancestor fell in, he was separated from the others. He flew in the dark space for thousands of years until he was exhausted, and the true essence in his body was about to be exhausted. Only then did the Jiang clan ancestor discover a ray of light. Wasn't this feeling very familiar? Wasn't it exactly the same as the strange thing that Chunxi had experienced before? However, it was different from what Chunxi had experienced. After the Jiang clan ancestor escaped from the dark space, he did not go to the Great World. Instead, he returned to the place where they had disappeared. Then, the Jiang clan ancestor met the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, who was quietly floating in the void, and holding the heaven-bearing effecate floating mirror. At that moment, the image of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor was completely different from the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. His appearance did not change at all. However, the monstrous pressure that was constantly emitted from his body, as well as that pair of eyes that looked down on all living things, made the Jiang clan ancestor, a half-saint, feel faintly panicked. Therefore, the Jiang clan ancestor firmly believed that the person in front of him was definitely not the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor he knew. As expected, just as the Jiang clan ancestor was stunned, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor actually aimed the heaven-bearing effecate floating mirror at him. With a flash of white light, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory was completely cut off. However, the last scene in his memory was not the scene of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor attacking him. Instead, it was the space wonder that had already formed behind the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor. Scattered Stars 9-star alignment. Chapter 478. The moment he saw the 9 stars alignment, a series of information slowly emerged in Chen Shi's mind and gradually formed a clearer network. The dark space, the 9 stars alignment, the Tai Ching Divine Ancestor, the sky-bearing technique, the floating dawn mirror, the great terror in the depths of the void, and the mysterious woman entangled in chains. Until this moment, Chen Shi finally understood what kind of terrifying level the mysterious woman's realm had reached. With the combined strength of the Tai Ching Divine Ancestor and the others, even in the heavenly jade domain, they were definitely a transcendent force comparable to a sacred ground. However, after they fell into the dark space, they were still so helpless. If not for the appearance of that white light, the Jiang ancestor might have been trapped alive inside. Even a supreme like Chen Shi could enter and exit the dark space at will. How could a half-step sage like the Jiang ancestor not be able to freely travel through the various planes? From this, it could be seen that the Jiang ancestor was definitely controlled by some higher-level power, which caused him to be unable to successfully escape from the dark space. As for the reason why the white light appeared, combined with Chen Shi's previous experience, it should be the result of the mysterious woman and the Great Terror's game. It was obvious that the mysterious woman was kind to the cultivators from Earth, and the Great Terror's standpoint was completely different from the mysterious woman's. This was because Chen Shi not only felt a strong pressure from him, but also a murderous aura that seemed to be mixed with mountains of corpses and seas of blood. If that powerful murderous aura was placed in the solar system, the result would be that wherever the murderous aura went, everything would wither and not a single blade of grass would grow. In addition, from the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Tai Ching Divine Ancestor should have been possessed and controlled by someone. Even a half-step sage could be easily possessed, so how high was the other party's cultivation level? Above the sage was the Immortal Emperor. Whether it was the Heavenly Jade Domain or the Heavenly Pivot Domain, it had been a long time since an Immortal Emperor had appeared. The Immortal Emperor seemed to only exist in the myths and legends of the primordial era. If the Supreme Chen Shi could destroy a planet with all his strength, then the Immortal Emperor could collapse the heavens and split the earth with a flick of his finger. It was truly the definition of holding the sun and moon in one's hand and stepping on the universe. Such a terrifying cultivation had completely exceeded the scope of Chen Shi's imagination. Perhaps when one reached the mysterious woman's level, they should no longer be called immortal cultivators, but immortals. Chen Shi looked down at the soul mirror in his hand, and a peculiar expression suddenly appeared on his face. The 9-star alignment in the memories of the Jiang clan's ancestor was actually different from what he saw with his own eyes. In the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Grand Pure One held the soul mirror and floated in the air like a god. As the 9 stars lined up, strange nomological imprints appeared one after another in the periphery of the solar system. These nomological imprints shone with a dazzling golden light. They were like gold foil pasted on a circular wall, encompassing the entire solar system within them. Chenghua, that brat said. For the past 10,000 years, there has been a powerful seal on the periphery of the solar system. Even if a celestial venerable were to come, he would definitely die. The two of them barged in recklessly, But unexpectedly, they didn't lose their lives because of this. Instead, they arrived on Earth without any obstructions. Calculating the time when the two of them came, wasn't it when Heaven Capital was destroyed? Could it be? This seal was removed because of this. But if there's a seal on the periphery of the solar system, why was I able to pass through this seal so easily and safely return to Earth? Could it be because of that mysterious woman again? And the reason why I suddenly went to the heavenly jade realm, which is billions of light years away, might also be related to that mysterious woman. At the thought of this, Chunshi couldn't help but raise his head and look toward the distant edge of the solar system. At that moment, Chunshi's eyes were no longer as clear as before. Instead, they were filled with curiosity toward this unknown world like that of a little fellow. The Immortal Emperor used the universe and the starry sky as a chessboard, and all living things as chess pieces. Then, what kind of chess game were they playing? While Chunshi was focused on exploring the past, the young lady who had risked her life to barge into the heavenly pivot ruins had returned. However, this time, she was no longer alone. Instead, she had brought with her a team of several hundred people from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The young lady stood at the bow of the ship with an excited expression. If it weren't for the fact that there was a tall middle-aged man in his 40s standing beside her, she would have screamed out in excitement. Xiao, or Daddy will ask you one last time. Are you sure you really entered the heavenly pivot ruins from here? Father, I've said it many times. I really went in. There's nothing inside. If you don't believe me, let me go in first later. I'll prove it to you. The young lady's name was Tuoba Xiao. The middle-aged man next to her was her father, Tobague. After Tobague received the news from his daughter, he considered the importance of this matter, and didn't inform the family head immediately. Instead, he brought his personal guards and followed Tuoba Xiao here. Immortal cultivators had a long lifespan. It wasn't rare for 10 generations to live in the same house. Therefore, there were usually many large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure. One could refer to the Jiang clan on Daiyu Island for this. The Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families were all large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure, but different from Xianyuan Changhua and Dongfang Yiji Tuoba Xiao, came from a branch family. So in terms of background, Tuoba Xiao was absolutely not worthy of Dongfang Yiji. And this was one of the important reasons why she was willing to die for Dongfang Yiji. From the moment the two of them started dating, Tuoba Xiao felt that she wasn't worthy of Dongfang Yiji. So she sacrificed far more than Dongfang Yiji. Under the leadership of Tuoba Xiao, the group soon arrived at the location where she entered the heavenly pivot ruins. Out of caution, Tobague didn't let his daughter take the risk. Instead, he called out 2 men from the team and let them go to explore. These men were prisoners from hostile forces of the family. After being captured by the Tuoba family, they had been brainwashed and controlled by a secret method. They had completely become the Tuoba family's pawns. Although their cultivation wasn't high, they were not afraid of death. They were the best candidates to explore the way. Soon, the 2 men piloted a small starship and rushed directly to the heavenly pivot ruins. Tobague nervously waited on the side. The moment he saw the 2 figures disappear, his pupil shrank. If it weren't for Tuoba Xiao, guaranteeing with her life, Tobague would never have believed her words. He was different from Tuoba Xiao's naivety. Tobague knew that once this news was confirmed, it would cause a sensation in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, after sending the men to investigate, Tobague's mood was even more nervous than Tuoba Xiao's. He paced back and forth on the bow of the ship. After waiting for about half an incense stick of time, Tobague finally saw the scene he had been dreaming of. Those 2 men, they actually came out of the heavenly pivot ruins unscathed. Listen to my orders. Set off. Destination: heavenly pivot ruins. Come. Wonderful book house. Chapter 479. Chunshi returned to the Sai courtyard with the soul mirror after learning about the Tianshu ruins. The soul mirror. Sky-bearing technique, floating dawn mirror. It was laughable that this innate treasure, which could kill a half-step saint in the hands of the grand pure ancestor, had been treated as a useless treasure for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, when Chen-Shi learned of the true power of the soul mirror, he began to think about how to take it for his own use. On one hand, it was because part of Yingying's soul was still imprisoned in it. On the other hand, it was because he didn't have a single magic treasure to back him up. If he encountered an opponent weaker than himself, Chen-Shi might be able to rely on his cultivation level to suppress them and win easily. However, if he encountered a half-step saint who was at the same cultivation level as him, or even a higher one, Chen-Shi reckoned that he wouldn't be able to protect himself at all. Moreover, there were signs of an immortal emperor appearing in the world. Chen-Shi didn't think that he could jump around in front of an immortal emperor with his mere dongshu cultivation, although the mysterious woman didn't seem to have any enmity towards him. As the saying went, if you leaned against a mountain, it would collapse. If you leaned against a man, he would run away. The mysterious woman had already saved him once. Would she save him a second time? If he couldn't even protect himself, how could he protect his family? Therefore, the matter of increasing his strength was imperative. Chen-Shi finally had some sense of crisis. If his sister-in-law knew about this, she would probably be sincerely happy for him. However, at the dongshu realm, accumulating the world's spiritual energy wasn't so important anymore. Comprehending and applying the laws of heaven and earth was the only thing Chen-Shi needed to focus on now. Therefore, Chen-Shi set his sights on the strange dark space. The flow of time in the dark space was very strange. Compared to Earth, time inside could even be said to be stationary. After all, a day in the dark space was roughly equivalent to a year on Earth. What kind of terrifying time ratio was this? Although there was no matter or spiritual energy in the dark space, Chen-Shi needed to calm down and stabilize his cultivation. Therefore, the dark space became the best place for him to cultivate. After entering the dongshu realm, Chen-Shi actually had the ability to travel between planes. However, the prerequisite was that he had to know the coordinates of the small plane he wanted to go to. The universe where Earth was located was the main plane. The dark space and the large world were small planes. Small planes were unstable, and at the same time, extremely difficult to discover. If he didn't leave the coordinates in advance, Chen-Shi wouldn't be able to find the specific location of the small plane, even if he poked a hole in the sky. This was the fundamental reason why the Grand Pure Ancestor, and the others had spent so much effort to find another cave abode in the universe. Dongshu stage immortal cultivators would only be able to freely travel to and from small planes after finding them through spatial rifts and setting up coordinates in them. Night. After the little fellow fell asleep, Chen-Shi couldn't wait to fly into the air and get busy. This was the first time he took the initiative to enter the dark space. Therefore, after closing his eyes and adjusting his breathing to bring his body to the best state, Chen-Shi gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and prepared to start trying to open the passage between the two worlds. Opening the passage was actually the same as opening the heavenly gate. Therefore, the moment Chen-Shi moved, an extremely strong spiritual energy fluctuation was set off 10,000 meters in the sky. Under the guidance of the spiritual energy, the clouds were like a vortex, gradually forming a huge cyclone. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the center of the cyclone. Like the heavenly gate, the position of the light was obviously the entrance of the passage between the two worlds. Seeing this, Chen-Shi didn't hesitate at all. His body swayed and he directly flew toward the light. It was like diving from a high platform. The moment Chen-Shi's body disappeared into the light, the entire world suddenly quieted down. There was no sound and no light. He was back. Chen-Shi lit up a ball of light and looked around. After confirming that he was back in the familiar dark space, he directly sat cross-legged in this endless void. At this moment, he was the only source of light in this dark space. As the deduction continued, two faintly discernible golden lines gradually appeared beside Chen-Shi. These were the two lines of law that he currently controlled. One led to Earth, the other to the outside world. 2 points as a line. As long as he found the base of the two planes, he could use this line of law to travel back and forth between the two worlds. Point, line, surface, body. And this was the basic form of the first law of heaven and earth. When Chen-Shi was able to freely control face, his cultivation would naturally be able to take another step forward. Today was the weekend. Primary school students did not have to go to school on weekends, so every Saturday night, the little girl would play until late into the night, until the next morning when she would wake up. Early in the morning, the little girl did not see Chen Shi when she woke up, so she took advantage of the time when Qin Ruoying was cooking for her to stroll around the courtyard. After this period of time together, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were already very familiar with the little girl. Therefore, when the little girl saw the two dejected coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted them. "Brother Cheng Hua, Brother Yi Ji, good morning." "Good morning, Nian Nian, good morning to you." Cheng Hua did not say anything, and Yi Ji did not seem to be in a good mood. After trying hard to squeeze out a smile at the little girl, the two were like students who had made a mistake, obediently waiting outside the Chuehua gate for Qin Xueqing's call. It was not that they were deliberately giving the little girl a hard time, but the reason why their mood was so heavy was because today was the day of being beaten again. Qin Wanqing was incredible now. After this period of actual combat tempering, she had completely walked out of a martial artist's path that belonged to her. So even if the two of them attacked together, they were not her match at all. Qin Xueqing seemed to be very vengeful. As her strength grew stronger, her attacks became more and more ruthless, so that the two of them would be beaten half to death by her every time. Although their lives were not in danger, but it was really painful. Looking at the two of them now, where was the young and frivolous attitude they had when they first came here? Their injuries had just recovered, and sister-in-law was ready to ask them to go out to practice again. The little girl did not know the details. Therefore, when she saw Qin Xueqing coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted Qin Xueqing. "Aunt, are you going out to play? Can you bring me along?" Hearing this, Qin Xueqing suddenly stopped in her tracks. She lowered her head and looked at the cute little niece in front of her, who was like a porcelain doll. Looking at her big bright eyes, Qin Xueqing could not help but hesitate for a moment, as if she was thinking about something. After a while, Qin Xueqing made a decision in her heart. Didn't Chen Shi not want Nian Nian to cultivate? Then I'll make her want to learn. Therefore, Qin Xueqing was like an evil woman who used a lollipop to lure a little girl, and for the first time a smile hung on her face. "Nian Nian, Aunt wants to take them to practice martial arts. It's the kind of martial arts that you see on TV. Do you want to learn? If you want to learn, Aunt can teach you." Jiutian Divine Emperor. Chapter 480. Martial Arts. After hearing Qin Xueqing's words, the little fellow suddenly blinked her eyes blankly. It was no wonder that her reaction would be so cute and slow. After all, Nian Nian was still young. Currently, she was only at the age where she liked to watch cartoons. Although it was not that she had never watched Wuxia movies, but the Wuxia movies that were popular in recent years could not be regarded as Wuxia movies in the true sense. At best, they could only be regarded as historical romance movies. Just based on those melodramatic romantic scenes, how could they win the hearts of children? Therefore, the little fellow's impression of martial arts was completely at the ignorant stage. She could not be compared to the children of the 80s and 90s. 20 or 30 years ago, children usually liked to use a wooden stick as a long sword. They learned the martial arts moves on TV, and before they made a move, they must shout out the name of the move. For example, the 18 dragons subduing palms, 9 strategies beyond the swords, Buddha's palm and other martial arts skills. Basically every child knew 1 or 2 moves. Thinking about it, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the little fellow was not born in the hot-blooded era where the martial arts atmosphere was pervasive. Qin Xueqing's attitude towards the little fellow had always been neither cold nor warm. Today, she rarely took the initiative to take her to play, so the little fellow was naturally very happy. Therefore, she immediately blinked her big bright eyes, and then slightly tilted her head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie, what is martial arts? Is it fun?" "It's fun. After you learn it, you can be like the heroes on TV. There's nothing you can't do." "Really?" "Of course, why would Auntie lie to you?" At this moment, the smile on Qin Xueqing's face was really very bright. Looking at her proud look, she was simply like a demon holding candy to lure a little girl. She was just short of raising her tail. "Hey, you two come over here. I'll show Nian Nian what martial arts are." Qin Xueqing had always been taciturn. Today, in order to lure the little fellow to take the bait, she really used 120% of her strength. Seeing that the little guy seemed to be tempted, Qin Xueqing immediately let Chenghua and Yiji come to the center of the courtyard, ready to use them as punching bags to show the little guy what martial arts were. Since he said it was martial arts, then he definitely couldn't use magic. Chenghua and Yiji had been beaten up all this time, and under the influence of what they heard and saw, the two of them had learned a few fierce moves. As a result, a scene that shocked the little fellow appeared. In the center of the courtyard, Qin Xueqing was like a graceful butterfly, sometimes leaping up, sometimes crouching on the ground, twisting and turning, displaying her graceful figure. Perhaps it was because Qin Xueqing rarely sparred with others in the outside world, so even though her martial cultivation was extremely profound, she still lacked the fierce killing intent that came from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Therefore, her martial arts looked more like a dance. It's beautiful. Auntie is so beautiful. Since it was an exhibition match, Qin Xueqing's moves were naturally more gentle than usual, and it could be said that she didn't overdo it. The little fellow couldn't see the subtlety of it, but he was still completely attracted by her graceful dancing posture, so he excitedly clapped at the side. Looking at the little fellow's eager appearance, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but smile slightly. After forcing Chenghua and Yiji back with one palm, she lightly landed beside the little fellow, then asked with a smile, "How is it? Do you want to learn?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded his head like he was pounding garlic. "Yes. Okay, then come over here. Auntie will help you stretch your tendons and pull out your bones." "Okay." The little fellow didn't understand, only thinking that Qin Xueqing wanted to play a game with him, so he eagerly went over. Just as Qin Xueqing was teaching the little fellow the horse dance, Qinshi finally returned to the courtyard. This was the first time he entered the dark space, and he hadn't figured out the specific time ratio between the two worlds, so it caused him to come back slightly late. If it was in the past, it wouldn't be a problem if Qinshi came back a little late. But today was different. Qin Xueqing actually took advantage of his absence to start teaching the little fellow cultivation. Therefore, the moment Qinshi's figure appeared in the courtyard, the temperature seemed to drop a lot. "What are you doing?" Qinshi's tone didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as if he was talking about something very ordinary, but those who were familiar with him should know. This was a sign that he was angry. Qinshi was angry? After realizing that something big might happen next, Chenghua and Yiji immediately looked at each other, then quietly left the courtyard. It wasn't good to stay here for long, leaving was the best plan. At this moment, the little fellow also noticed Qinshi's figure, so she immediately stopped what she was doing and ran towards Qinshi eagerly. "Daddy, you're back?" The little fellow happily jumped into Qinshi's arms. Qinshi gently pinched her little face, then directly carried her from the ground. "Yes, Daddy went out to do something just now, so I didn't have time to make breakfast for you. You're not hungry, are you?" "I'm not hungry." The father and daughter talked as if there was no one else around, while Qin Xueqing waited silently by the side. When Qinshi looked at her, Qin Xueqing calmly replied, "I'm teaching her martial arts." Hearing this, before Qinshi could reply, the little fellow happily interrupted and shouted, "Auntie is teaching me martial arts. It's very fun. Daddy, do you want to learn?" "Is that so?" Qinshi chuckled. He gently reached out and pinched the tip of the little fellow's nose, which immediately caused her to act coquettishly. Qinshi seemed to be trying to make the little girl happy, but a question suddenly popped out of her mouth. "Why did you teach her without my permission?" It had to be said that his sister-in-law's behavior today really annoyed Qinshi a little. After all, from the day he returned to Earth, he had made up his mind to create an ordinary and happy childhood for the little fellow, just like ordinary children, to enjoy the pure happiness that they should enjoy at their age. The road of cultivation was long, but childhood was only a few short years. Did he want to deprive her of even these short years? "She's willing to learn, I'm willing to teach, it's that simple." "Then did you ask for my consent?" "Do you need it?" "Don't you need it?" Hearing this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but sneer, and coldly replied, "I started practicing martial arts when I was 3 years old, I had already practiced obvious strength when I was her age. Since learning martial arts is good for the body, why don't you let her learn? She's just a child. This time, Chunxi was really a little angry, so even his tone became much colder. Seeing this, Qin Shihuaqing was not afraid. Instead, she righteously retorted. She is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her whether she is willing to do it before you make a decision for her. You. Being choked by Qin Shihuaqing, Chunxi was so angry that he couldn't even speak. At this moment, the atmosphere in the yard was really a little awkward. The little fellow lay on Chunxi's shoulder, looking left and right at her father, right at her aunt, completely not understanding what they were quarreling about. But fortunately, just when Chunxi and Qin Shihuaqing were in a deadlock, Qin Ruoying suddenly appeared. She was holding a bowl of hot porridge in her hand, which was the white fungus and lotus seed porridge that she personally cooked for the little fellow. Nian, come in and eat. Chapter 481. Eat. After hearing Qin Ruoying's call, the little fellow's eyes suddenly lit up. So, she immediately signaled Chunxi to put her down, and then ran back to the west wing with Qin Ruoying. In fact, how could the little fellow not know that her father was quarreling with her aunt? Although she didn't understand why the two were quarreling, it was the first time such a hostile scene appeared in the courtyard, so it made the little fellow feel very awkward. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruoying's call, the little fellow directly ran away like Changhua and Yiji. Sister, you judge, do you think what I said makes sense? Qin Shihuaqing had long known about Qin Ruoying's memory loss, but because she was now angry, she wanted to pull Qin Ruoying, such a strong foreign aide, to support her. After hearing Qin Shihuaqing's question, Qin Ruoying, who had already walked up the stairs of the west wing, also stopped. But unfortunately, Qin Ruoying didn't intend to turn back to support her. It's none of my business, you guys can quarrel slowly. After saying this sentence very calmly, Qin Ruoying took the bowl back to the room. Qin Shihuaqing didn't have much reaction to this, because she already knew that with Qin Ruoying's current character, she wouldn't care about anyone other than Nian. And the reason why she still chose to ask Qin Ruoying was because she didn't want to continue to be in a deadlock with Chunxi. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruoying's answer, Qin Shihuaqing rolled her eyes at Chunxi, and then turned back to the east wing without looking back. This is great. In the courtyard, which was very lively just now, in the blink of an eye, only Chunxi was left alone. Chunxi was really depressed in his heart, but there was nowhere to vent, so he could only return to the guest room with a stomach full of resentment like the two sisters. What could he do? Was he going to beat his sister-in-law? This was the first time that someone questioned Chunxi's education philosophy. Long before Qin Ruoying lost her memory, Chunxi had already discussed with Qin Ruoying whether to teach the little fellow to cultivate. Unlike Chunxi's firm attitude, Qin Ruoying's attitude at that time was somewhat ambiguous. She neither agreed nor opposed, as if she wanted to leave this decision to the little fellow herself. But how old was Nian? How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was also because of this that Chunxi never thought of teaching Nian cultivation. Qin Shihuaqing's words seemed to be very reasonable, but she had never even had a boyfriend, so raising a child, she knew nothing. Chunxi sulked in the room. But after thinking about it, his mind was still haunted by Qin Shihuaqing's powerful question. She is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her if she agrees before you make a decision for her. Am I really meddling too much? Across the wall, Chunxi muttered to himself. Then, as if he had thought of something, he suddenly got up and quickly left the room. Then came to the outside of the west wing, and looked at the mother and daughter in the room through the window. In the room, the little fellow was holding a big bowl of porridge and slurping it. Qin Ruoying sat next to her and whispered from time to time, "Drink slowly, be careful not to choke." What a beautiful scene this was. Seeing this scene, Chunxi's depression in his heart suddenly disappeared. He silently waited outside the window. After the little fellow finished her breakfast, she looked back and saw that her father was still outside the room. She immediately became as happy as a little bird, opened her arms and threw herself directly into Chunxi's arms. "Dad, the porridge made by Mom is delicious. But Mom also said that you can't eat it. Dad, are you envious of me, haha? Hearing this, Chunshi couldn't help but laugh and pinch her little face, pretending to scare her. Eat, 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 all you know is to eat all day. Be careful, you will become a big fatty in the future, then no one will like you. Why won't anyone like me if I become fat? Dad, didn't you say that you like me the most? The little fellow pouted unhappily, as if she was angry. Seeing this, Chunshi could only quickly coax her. Dad will definitely like you, no matter how you look in the future. In Dad's heart, Nian will always be the most beautiful girl in the world. After hearing Chunshi's answer, the little fellow rolled her big eyes and suddenly grinned. What about Mom? Is Mom not beautiful? Mom is as beautiful as you. Really? Of course you are Mom's child. How could you look different from Mom? That's right. Then when I grow up, I will definitely be as beautiful as Mom. As if she had encountered something extremely happy, the little fellow giggled, which made Chunshi couldn't help but laugh foolishly with her. The father and daughter stood on the steps and whispered to each other. After Qin Ruoying cleaned up the table and prepared to go back to the kitchen to wash the dishes, Chunshi offered to help her wash the dishes. Unexpectedly, Qin Ruoying didn't even look at him. She carried the bowl and chopsticks to the kitchen, minding her own business. Chunshi had long been used to Qin Ruoying's current attitude, so he didn't take it to heart. Seeing that his wife didn't need his help, he carried the little fellow back to the guest room where he was currently staying. Just as he returned to the room, Chunshi put away the smile on his face, and with a very serious expression, he looked at the little fellow and asked, Nian, tell Dad honestly. Do you like the things that Auntie taught you? Hearing this, the little fellow blinked her eyes, as if she didn't quite understand the meaning of his words. Just as Chunshi expected, she was only a 6-year-old child. How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was like parents sending their children to learn music, art, and dance. Without the guidance of parents, no matter how talented a child was, it was impossible to be naturally interested in these things. And on this question, Chunshi did indeed make a mistake. That was, he had never let the little fellow come into contact with cultivation, so how could he judge whether the little fellow liked cultivation or not? His sister-in-law wasn't wrong. Since Nian was a person with the ability to think independently, then she should have her own choice. Just like learning music, art, and dance, there were no disadvantages to cultivation. Instead, there were countless benefits. So, on the premise that he had the resources in this area, why couldn't he leave the choice to the little fellow herself? If Nian liked it, he would teach her. If Nian didn't like it, then it was fine not to learn. Therefore, after thinking this point through, Chunshi very solemnly handed the choice to the little fellow. Nian, tell Dad. Do you want to learn? 9 Heavens, Divine Emperor. Chapter 482. Do you want to learn? The little fellow was not used to Chunshi being so serious. Therefore, while she was thinking hard about the true meaning of this sentence, she couldn't help but put her thumb in her mouth. While sucking on her finger, she tilted her head and seriously thought about her father's words. You're not allowed to eat your finger. Chunshi saw the little fellow's hesitation. Therefore, he gently removed the little fellow's finger from her mouth and hugged her in his arms. Then, using a very gentle tone, he asked again, Don't be afraid, just tell Daddy if you want to learn or not. If you want to learn, Daddy will teach you. I promise I'll teach you better than Auntie. After hearing Chunshi's words, the little fellow finally reacted. She rubbed her head against Chunshi's shoulder a few times before hesitantly replying, Yes. Her voice fell. Without waiting for Chunshi's reply, the little fellow looked up nervously and asked, Daddy, is learning to dance very difficult? There are many children in our class learning to dance. They say learning to dance is very, very tiring and very painful. I'm not afraid of being tired, but I'm afraid of pain. The little fellow's voice became softer and softer until it was almost inaudible like a mosquito. At this moment, Chunshi finally understood her thoughts. After all this time, the child actually understood. Learning martial arts as learning to dance? Chunshi did not know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at the little fellow's reluctant look, Chunshi could not help but smile and rub her little head. Then he carried her to the bed and said to her with a serious face, Nian, you have to know. No matter what you learn before you learn it, it will be a very difficult and tiring process. So before you choose to learn, you have to make up your mind and confirm if you can really endure this hardship. If you feel tired and tiring halfway through learning, or even unwilling to learn anymore, then no matter if you learn to dance, learn to draw, or learn anything else, you are destined to achieve nothing. So you must remember what I said to you today. There is only one way to fail, and that is to give up halfway. Once you've made your choice, you have to persevere no matter how hard it is. Do you understand? Chunshi tried his best to speak slowly, so that the little fellow could hear every word he said. After hearing this, the little fellow's reaction was just as Chunshi had expected. After all, Nian had never been a spoiled child who was afraid of hardship and fatigue. She could understand and distinguish right from wrong. Therefore, when Chunshi asked her again if she wanted to learn, the little girl's hesitation disappeared and turned into determination. Yes. Whether it was learning martial arts or dancing, it was fine. The little fellow's attitude was what Chunshi really cared about. Since she had already made up her mind, how could Chunshi stop her? Alright then, Daddy will teach you personally. Remember, don't listen to your aunt in the future. Jingle, jingle, jingle. What does she know? Daddy can flatten her with one hand. Come, sit down first. Daddy will teach you how to draw chi into your body. Don't worry, it won't hurt at all. Chunshi finally began to teach the little fellow cultivation. Of course, the things he taught were completely different from what Qin Xueqing taught. Qin Xueqing only wanted to teach the little fellow martial arts, but Chunshi directly taught her the immortal cultivation method. So the question was, why didn't her sister-in-law directly teach the little fellow the immortal cultivation method that Chunshi taught her? Instead, she only taught the little fellow some basic skills of tendons and bones. One had to know that her sister-in-law had been a heavenly being for a long time, and was already considered a real immortal cultivator. The reason why she didn't directly teach the little fellow cultivation was actually because she had considered Chunshi's attitude towards this matter. Therefore, she used martial arts as an excuse to indirectly remind Chunshi. The child was not young anymore, so she naturally knew what to do and what not to do. Since cultivation was not harmful to the little fellow, and it could even strengthen her body and enhance her physique, why didn't she learn it? Swords and sabers were innocent, and sins were all caused by people's hearts. Qin Xueqing's point of view was not wrong, so although she had a sour face all day long, her heart was warm. Chunshi was afraid that the little fellow would accidentally hurt other children at school, but with the little fellow's current wisdom, how could she bully others for no reason? After all, she was now a class leader, a young pioneer, and a candidate for the school's 3 good students. Under Chunshi's careful guidance, the little fellow embarked on her own journey of cultivation in a daze. At the same time, Tuobaxiu hurried to Earth with her reinforcements. Unlike Tuobaxiu, Er's excitement, although Tobague was also very excited, he was more nervous and puzzled in his heart. There were too many rumors about the Dubhe ruins, so even though Tobague was now in this peaceful galaxy, he still felt like he was in a dream. Out of safety considerations, Tobague didn't send out any death warriors to explore the planets. Instead, he used his divine sense to quickly sweep the planets. After determining that there were no signs of surging heaven and earth spiritual energy, he hurried to the next planet. Their journey here had been too smooth. It was different from the mountains of knives, seas of fire, and hellish danger that people had always imagined. The so-called Dubhe ruins was in fact an ordinary galaxy that couldn't be more ordinary. There was only one star in this galaxy, and although the rest of the planets were large, they weren't life planets at all. There wasn't even a bit of heaven and earth spiritual energy in the periphery. There was no spiritual energy, no life. Naturally, it was impossible to give birth to any ancient vicious beasts, evil spirits, or other such terrifying existences. Therefore, Tobague couldn't help but wonder if he had come to the wrong place. How could such a broken place be called an Empyrean forbidden area? Could it be his cultivation was too low, so he couldn't discern the mystery? Tobague was really puzzled. But at this time, the lookout who had been standing at the bow of the ship and observing the situation suddenly cried out in alarm. Look! There's someone there. The moment Hibague heard these words, it was as if he had been electrocuted. He suddenly shot up from his chair and flew to the bow of the ship at the fastest speed he had ever flown in his life. Where is it? Before Hibague arrived, Tabague's voice had already sounded in the lookout's ear. The lookout pointed. Just as Hibague was about to speak, Hibague had already turned and rushed to the helm of the ship. Turn the helm and head to that planet. From now on, listen to my orders in all matters. Don't make a move without permission. If the situation changes, I will use the cup as a signal to kill all of you. Remember. As Tabague issued a series of orders, the incomparably huge Star Cha also turned around and flew towards the seemingly small moon. Wonderful book house. Chapter 483. Ever since his family moved to the moon, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have accepted his fate. Because he knew very well that with the remaining strength of Tiandu, it was impossible to match Chen Shi, who had already become a supreme being. Therefore, he chose to compromise and instead put all his energy into presiding over the reconstruction of Tiandu. Did you see that? The enemy was on that blue planet. But what should we rely on to find the other party for revenge? Was it because of the resentment and anger in the heart that had nowhere to vent? Or was it because of the ridiculous self-esteem that faced death with equanimity, and would rather die than live in disgrace? Therefore, whenever someone questioned why he was silent, Yuhuan Tianzuan's reply was always so calm and objective. Did he really have no resentment in his heart? How was that possible? If it were not for Chen Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan would still be the head of the 10 celestial lords, ruling the tens of millions of descendants of ancient cultivators in the world alone. But now? Tens of millions of people had already turned into smoke, and only a few thousand people were left, relying on their strong cultivation base to survive the catastrophe. What did this mean? It meant that Tiandu had no future. Could it be possible to rebuild a complete Tiandu with only the remaining celestial lords, divine generals, and celestial lords? What a joke! Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan's greatest wish now was not to kill Chen Shi, but to be able to see Tiandu blossom in its former glory in his lifetime. In order to achieve this goal, Yuhuan Tianzuan lowered his always high head to Chen Shi. As for whether others could understand his approach, it was not something he needed to worry about. Yuhuan Tianzuan decided to rebuild a new imperial palace on the moon. There was no Dragon Head Peak here, so he chose the highest mountain on the far side of the moon, and the materials were all taken from the ruins of Saturn's ring, which could be considered as making good use of waste. On this day, as usual, Yuhuan Tianzuan stood on the top of the mountain, silently examining the ugly new home in front of him. All of a sudden, he sensed a strong spiritual qi fluctuation above his head. Yuhuan Tianzuan subconsciously thought that it was Chen Shi again, so his face was immediately covered with a layer of frost. However, what Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't expect was, he raised his head, but what he saw was not Chen Shi's detestable smile, but a strange ship with a strange appearance and an incomparably large size. This ship was as big as a ship on the sea. At the same time that Yuhuan Tianzuan discovered the ship, the people on the ship seemed to have discovered him as well. Thus, the huge ship sped towards his location. In the blink of an eye, the giant ship landed about 500 meters away from the surface of the moon. And this distance of 500 meters just happened to be the edge of Chen Shi's seal. The people on the boat seemed to know that there was a seal here. As soon as the ship stopped, a figure flew out from it. The person who came was Tabague. Tabague's cultivation was only at Yuanying, so as he got closer and closer to the moon, his mood became more and more nervous. Because he saw the star lords and divine generals who were busy on the ground, and he also felt an incomparably strong true essence fluctuation from these people. These people in front of him were all existences above golden core. And looking at their busy posture, it seemed that they were doing some of the lowest level of manual labor. Using golden core yuanying as manual labor? After seeing this scene, Tabague was really frightened. The cultivation of this person in front of me is unfathomable. I can't feel a trace of true essence fluctuation from him. And looking at this person's expression and posture, it seems that he is supervising the work of these people? Could it be? This person is the master of the Dubhe ruins? In the blink of an eye, countless thoughts flashed through Tobague's mind. He saw Yuhuan Tianzuan, and Yuhuan Tianzuan also saw him. This was the gaze of an Empyrean. At that moment, Tobague felt a pressure like a falling stone smashing into his heart. So he immediately cupped his fists towards Yuhuan Tianzuan and bowed. Then he said in a clear voice, "Junior Tobague greets Senior." Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer. He was like an aloof emperor. After sizing up Tobague, he looked at the giant ship to the side. Seeing Yuhuan Tianzuan not speak, Tobague thought that his trespassing on the Dubhe ruins had angered him. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, he immediately added, "I have long heard of the Dubhe ruins' reputation. Today, I trespassed on this precious land for a reason. I hope Senior won't blame me." Tobague lowered his posture to a very low level. Even so, Yuhuan Tianzuan still didn't respond. Tobague thought that Yuhuan Tianzuan was deliberately putting on airs for him to see. So he bowed his head towards Yuhuan Tianzuan again and said, "A few days ago, Junior's two unworthy nephews trespassed on this precious land because they were young and ignorant. Now that there is no news of them, my family is a little worried. After several discussions, my family's elders sent Junior to look for traces of them. My children are young and ignorant. If they have disturbed you, I hope Senior won't blame them." Here, Tobague, "I apologize to Senior on their behalf." As Lin Ming's voice fell, Tobague still maintained his bowing posture. He seemed to be waiting for Yuhuan Tianzuan's reply. In truth, this was also a kind of probe. He was probing Yuhuan Tianzuan's attitude towards these intruders, so that Tobague could think of a way to deal with them. From beginning to end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't respond. Even the expression on his face didn't change. In fact, it wasn't that Yuhuan Tianzuan was deliberately putting on airs to give Tobague a show of strength. The reason he didn't respond was because Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't understand Tobague's words at all. Tobague's accent was somewhat similar to ancient Chinese. It gave off a strange feeling. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained calm on the surface, but the truth was that he was seriously deducing in his mind. It wasn't until he truly understood Tobague's words that Yuhuan Tianzuan finally opened his mouth and spoke. Where did you come from?" Reporting to Senior, "This Junior comes from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The Bague family." "Supreme Palace enclosure? What is that place?" As Yuhuan Tianzuan spoke, he flew up into the sky. He seemed to be very interested in Tobague, so he went straight to the top of the seal, almost at the same level as Tobague. Tobague didn't know the secret, so he immediately bowed and said, "Reporting to Senior, the Supreme Palace enclosure is just outside the Tianshu ruins. If Xingcha flies at full speed, it will only take 2 days to reach it." "Is that so?" Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly, as if he wasn't very interested in Tobague's answer. Immediately afterward, he suddenly pointed to the giant ship not far away and slowly asked, "Is this the Xingcha you speak of?" Hearing this, Tobague subconsciously looked in the direction that Empyrean Yuhuan was pointing at, and then quickly replied, "That's right." Before Tobague's voice fell, he suddenly felt an incomparably massive amount of true essence rush towards him from behind. It turned out that Yuhuan Tianzuan actually took advantage of the moment he turned around and directly launched an attack at him. Chapter 484. Tobague never thought that Yuhuan Tianzuan would suddenly attack him, and even use a sneak attack, completely disregarding his identity. Therefore, when he noticed something strange behind him, it was too late to resist. Just like the acupuncture points in Wuxia novels, Empyrean Yuhuan's hold body technique, which had been accumulating power for a long time, was unleashed. Tobague immediately froze in place, as if he had been hit by the sunflower acupuncture point technique. Tobague tried to break free, but the difference in cultivation between him and Yuhuan Tianzuan was too great, so he couldn't break free for a while. Seeing this, Tobague immediately turned hostile and cursed. "I called you Senior in vain, but I didn't expect you to be so despicable and shameless." Tobague kept cursing. Seeing the sudden change of events, the entourage he brought with him this time jumped out from Xingcha and tried to come to the rescue. But soon, These followers all stopped what they were doing and floated several hundred meters away from Tobagwe, with blank expressions on their faces. They only had a few hundred gold core cultivators on their side, and at most 3 to 5 yuanying. But what about the other side? There were thousands of divine generals and star lords, and 6 Empyreans who appeared out of nowhere, standing directly in a row with Yuhuan Tianzuan. What was going on? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. No one dared to take a step forward. Even Tuoba was stunned in place. She was naive, but she was definitely not stupid. In this tense situation, there was no need to guess. Her father should have accidentally angered the other side? So Tuoba who didn't know what was going on, immediately walked out of the crowd and carefully came to Tobague's side. She followed her father and bowed respectfully to Yuhuan Tianzuan. The Tuoba family didn't mean to offend Senior. Please let my father go. Hearing this, Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan, who had a cold expression on his old face earlier, smiled and replied with a chuckle. You are guests from afar, so why would this old man make things difficult for you? After all, Tuoba was still inexperienced, so she couldn't understand Yuhuan Tianzuan's strange behavior. Just as she stood rooted to the ground, thinking about how to resolve this conflict, Tobague, who was bound to the side, seemed as if he had suddenly discovered a secret. He couldn't help but shout out in shock, Xiaoer, don't be afraid. They can't hurt father. Retreat. Everyone retreat. Get away from this formation. Just now, I only thought that this was the mountain protection array that you guys had set up. I didn't expect that. This formation is actually a prison used to imprison you. Tobague came from a branch family. Since he was able to serve as a commander of the clan at such a young age, he naturally wasn't an idiot. Just like how Yuhuan Tianzuan had been observing him, he had also been observing Yuhuan Tianzuan. Tobague always felt that something was wrong. It wasn't until Yuhuan Tianzuan made a move and the divine generals and star lords leapt out from below, but not a single one of them managed to pass through the array formation, that Tobague finally regained his composure. The truth was similar to what he had guessed. How was this a mountain protection array? It was simply an entrapment array that only allowed people to enter and not leave. When Chunshi had laid down the array formation, he hadn't used any special magic treasures or flags. Thus, the strength of this array formation wasn't very high. It was also because of this that Tobague had mistakenly thought that this was a mountain protection array. Otherwise, with Heaven Capital's current strength, it wasn't impossible for them to escape from it. But this place was so close to Earth. If they really tried to break the array formation, they would inevitably alarm Chunshi, the one who had laid down the array formation. Before they could succeed in breaking the array formation, the Great Demon King would have already descended to the moon to deal with them. And the reason that Emperor Yuhuan was able to capture Tobague through the Great Array formation was entirely because his cultivation was far higher than Tobague's. Thus, he was able to mobilize the world's heaven and earth spiritual energy to capture Tobague. It was like a tourist playing with a tiger through a fence, and then accidentally having his clothes bitten by the tiger. It looked terrifying, but there wasn't any danger at all. In the worst case, he could just tear his clothes and give them to the tiger. With Tobague's cultivation, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only hold him for an incense stick of time. After an incense stick of time, he would naturally be able to escape. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Tobague completely calmed down. He calmly said, Senior's cultivation is profound. If you insist on keeping this junior here to chat with you, then it is not impossible. But if you have other requests, then please forgive this junior for not accompanying you. Seeing Tobague put on an appearance like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water, Emperor Yuhuan didn't feel offended in the slightest. Instead, he chuckled and said, Since you've already seen through the clues, then this old man will also be blunt. Actually, you don't need to make wild guesses. The reason this old man captured you is only to ask you a few questions. I hope you can answer truthfully. There were many people in Tiandu. Tobague didn't dare to tear apart Yuhuan Tianzuan, lest he cause more trouble. Therefore, after hearing Yuhuan Tianzuan's words, Tobague immediately replied, Senior, please speak. This junior promises to tell you everything he knows. In fact, Tobagwe had already made up his mind. No matter what Yuhuan Tianzuan said next, he would never take half a step closer to this great array formation. As long as he could endure until the body lock technique was lifted, he would immediately take his people and leave this damned place. The reason was simple. Even a fierce character like Yuhuan Tianzuan was imprisoned here. Then, what kind of terrifying existence was the one who imprisoned him? So even if Tobagwe was given 10 times the courage, he still wouldn't explore the Dubhe ruins. Tobagwe honestly waited for Yuhuan Tianzuan to ask his questions. But after waiting for a while, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have finished discussing with the other Empyreans. Then he finally asked his first question. First question. How is my Tiandu's strength? How is it compared to your Tuoba family? Tiandu's strength is valiant, superior to the Tuoba family by 30%. Second question. With Tiandu's strength, what is its position in the Supreme Palace enclosure? Hearing this, Tobagwe couldn't help but be stunned. At this point in time, he had also vaguely guessed Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's objective. Therefore, his originally relaxed state of mind became tense again. It is in the top 3, but if it is compared with Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, Tiandu may be slightly inferior. After hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. He probably didn't expect that, with Tiandu's strength, it was actually not the top force in the Supreme Palace enclosure. But this was also good, because only in this way could he be more confident in achieving his goal. So, after Yuhuan Tianzuan was silent for a while, he finally asked his third question. Third question. If my Tiandu is willing to unite with the Tuoba family in the form of marriage, can the Tuoba family accept my Tiandu to enter the Supreme Palace enclosure and become a force for the Tuoba family? Come. Wonderful book house. Chapter 485. Enter the Supreme Palace enclosure. After hearing these words, even though Tobagwe had a premonition in his heart, he couldn't help but feel a little dizzy at this moment. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was really frank and straightforward, not hiding the thoughts in the depths of his heart at all. Was he tempted? Of course he was. So even though Tobagwe was not the head of the Tuoba family, he subconsciously stood from the perspective of the head of the family, and began to seriously consider Yuhuan Tianzuan's proposal. But unfortunately, such an important decision wasn't something that Tobagwe could easily make. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and then nervously replied, Reporting to Senior. This is a serious matter. Junior's words carry little weight, and my weight in the family is limited. Please forgive me for not being able to give you an immediate answer. How about this? Junior will immediately set off to return to the Supreme Palace enclosure and report this matter to the head of the family. If the head of the family has this intention, then Junior will ask him to personally come and discuss the details with you. What does Senior think? Tobagwe was indeed tempted, but he wasn't stupid. With Heaven Capital's background, why would they need to rely on others, and even take the initiative to propose an alliance with the Tuoba family? Could it be that Heaven Capital needed the protection of the Tuoba family to gain a foothold in the Supreme Palace enclosure? How is that possible? Divine generals, star lords, and even the 7 Empyreans. Although the world was big, where couldn't one call home? Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan wasn't trying to form an alliance with the Tuoba family at all, but to divert the Tuoba family, and even the entire Supreme Palace enclosure's influence to oppose the master of the Dubhe ruins. Heaven Capital's strength was already terrifying. Then, how terrifying was the great figure that imprisoned them? This great figure should be the true master of the Dubhe ruins, right? Seeking luck and avoiding disaster was everyone's nature. Therefore, after thinking about it several times, Tobagwe finally decided to stay out of it. So even if Yuhuan Tianzuan used Heaven Capital as a bargaining chip, Tobagwe didn't dare to easily get involved. Tobagwe tried to be perfunctory. But how could Yuhuan Tianzuan be so easily fooled? Thus, after seeing the hesitation on Tobagwe's face, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately gave him a strong dose of medicine. Tobagwe was so frightened that he nearly broke free from his shackles. Go back and report to the Patriarch. Ha! If this old man is not wrong with your aptitude, it will probably take you another 300 to 500 years to successfully advance to the celestial venerable realm. Since that's the case, let's make a deal. As long as you agree to this old man's request, this old man can guarantee that you will become a heavenly venerable within 60 years. What do you think? After hearing these words, Tobagwe was thoroughly shocked. Yuhuan Tianzuan's words were tactful enough. In reality, how could he not know how capable he was? Not to mention 300 to 500 years. Even if he spent his entire life with his talent, he might not be able to successfully advance to Empyrean. Therefore, after hearing Yuhuan Tianzuan promise that he could successfully advance to Empyrean within 60 years, Tobagwe's heart was finally moved. I don't know what Senior's request is. If it is not beyond the scope of this junior's ability, this junior can give it a try. Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face suddenly revealed a satisfied smile. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. As long as you agree to this old man's request. This old man can even make a heart demon oath here, guaranteeing that I will fulfill my promise in the future. So, can we talk openly and honestly now? After a detailed discussion, Tobagwe and Yuhuan Tianzuan finally reached a consensus. Yuhuan Tianzuan's request was very simple. That was, Tobagwe would send out death warriors to wreak havoc on Earth in order to contain Qinshi. At the same time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would gather everyone's strength and take advantage of this opportunity to break the seal of the Great Array. As long as the Great Array was broken, the remnants of Tiandu would immediately board the giant ship and leave the Dubhe ruins with Tobagwe. Wasn't the plan simple? Whether this seemingly simple plan could be carried out smoothly or not. In fact, it would depend on how much Yuhuan Tianzuan knew about Qinshi. Qinshi was indeed a supreme, but he was not an omniscient and omnipotent god. As long as Tobagwe followed the plan and simultaneously launched a destructive attack on Earth from all directions, then would Qinshi rush over to stop them from breaking the array as soon as possible? Or would he rush over to deal with those ants that dared to cause trouble in his territory? For Yuhuan Tianzuan, the ancient immortal cultivators represented by Tiandu were obviously the true masters of Earth. Therefore, the Homo evolutus living on Earth were nothing more than ants to him. If it wasn't for Qinshi stopping him in time, causing him to fail in building the Soul Bridge, then Tiandu should have successfully descended to Earth by now. Once Tiandu succeeded in descending, what followed would inevitably be a massacre that would sweep across the globe. Dynasties would change, rivers and mountains would change masters. A new regime would always be built on the corpses of countless people. With Yuhuan Tianzuan's understanding of Qinshi, he could basically be sure that, once Earth was threatened, Qinshi would inevitably solve it as soon as possible. Then they could use this opportunity to break the seal and fly freely in the sky. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the entire Tiandu as a bargaining chip, and the Empyrean realm as bait. Not only did he satisfy the collective interests of the Tuoba family, but he also satisfied Tobagwe's personal interests. Then, what reason did Tobagwe have not to take the risk? Take a gamble and turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. Take a gamble and turn yellow soil into gold. Under Tobagwe's command, all the death warriors he brought with him were dispatched. In order to ensure the success of the plan, Tobagwe gave all his magic weapons to these death warriors, hoping that they could delay Qinshi for a while. Tuoba Xiao, didn't know what agreement her father and Yuhuan Tianzuan had reached. However, when she saw those small star carts, each carrying 3 to 5 men of sacrifice, she faintly had a bad premonition in her heart. Father, what are you doing? Tuoba Xiao, wanted to know the details. But what she didn't expect was her father, who had always been very gentle to her, seemed to have changed at this moment. Not only did he not answer her question, but he impatiently locked her in the cabin. Father, what's wrong with you? Let me out. Tuoba Xiao struggled with all her might, but the cabin door had been set up by Tobagwe, so she couldn't go out at all. Seeing that Tobagwe didn't respond for a long time, Tuoba Xiao finally gave up this futile struggle. Then, she silently went to a porthole and looked at the blue planet not far away through the porthole. She stared at the planet in a daze. Suddenly, a strong true essence fluctuation that made one's heart palpitate suddenly surged out from the side. Tuoba Xiao or quickly looked down and saw a group of people led by Yuhuan Tianzuan floating at the edge of the array, attacking it with all their strength. Their plan it began. Chapter 486. Tobagwe had brought a total of 200 death warriors with him, but unfortunately, the average cultivation of these death warriors wasn't high. Besides a few golden cores, most of them were at the foundation establishment stage. Therefore, in addition to these death warriors, Tobagwe had to sacrifice most of his followers in order to ensure the smooth progress of the plan. Although most of these followers were from the side branches of the Tuoba family, they were still considered to be from the same branch as Tobagwe. Some of them even called him grandfather. It was precisely because of this that when Tobagwe made this decision, his heart was actually dripping blood. This was the so-called success of a general, was built on the bones of 10,000. In the face of absolute benefits, the only thing Tobagwe could do was silently make a promise in his heart. He promised that he would treat the family of these followers well in the future. This was an unavoidable sacrifice for the sake of a great cause. Tobagwe believed that, once the plan succeeded, as a party to this transaction, he would obtain an unimaginable interest. In fact, as long as he could smoothly become an Empyrean, then with the support of Yuhuan Tianzuan, Tobagwe could even choose to establish his own family and become a rising power comparable to the Tuoba family. In order to lure Tobagwe into the trap, Yuhuan Tianzuan had even directly made a heart demon oath in front of him. In the face of such generous transaction conditions and such an honest transaction partner, how could Tobagwe not be moved? Of course there were risks. Since he chose to stand on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side, it meant that he would inevitably become a thorn in the side of the master of the Dubhe ruins. Once the plan failed, Tobagwe didn't need to think to know how miserable his fate would be. Even so, Tobagwe chose to stand on the side of benefits. Only children could distinguish between right and wrong. Adults only looked at benefits. In the face of absolute benefits, some people could even betray their own flesh and blood, let alone distant relatives 3 or 5 generations away. Therefore, the Tuoba family's action team set out according to plan. In order to delay as much time as possible, Tobagwe ordered 3 people to form a group. Each group would drive a small star car to ensure that when they were intercepted, they wouldn't be shot down by the other side. These small star cars weren't high-grade, so they didn't have the ability to jump through space. However, even at full speed, his speed was still comparable to that of a Yuanian cultivator. Thus, not long after these over 100 teams set out, Tobagwe received a reply from each team. The various groups were already in position. They were only waiting for Tobagwe's order. Then, these warriors from Supreme Palace enclosure would immediately enter the atmosphere, setting off a storm of blood and dismembered limbs. Tobagwe turned to look at the moon not too far away. After quickly communicating with Yuhuan Tianzuan through divine sense, he gritted his teeth and transmitted his voice to the other teams in a voice that was close to a roar. Kill! 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 As the battle cries rang out one after another, the Xingcha ships rushed towards the land below at the fastest speed, as if they were racing a dragon boat. In an instant, 100 barges strive against the current, the one who strives first. 1,000 sails are launched, and the one who advances bravely wins. Perhaps this could also be considered a war. The soldiers did not need to think about how this war started, nor did they need to think about what role they played in this war. They only needed to do one thing, and that was, according to Tobagwe's instructions, they would launch an inhumane massacre of all life on this planet. The first to be attacked was not the United States with powerful armaments, but Wuxia. Because the Western Earth's altitude was higher, and Mount Everest was nearby, a Xingcha ship landed along Mount Everest and soon arrived at Shigatse. Just like the song My Hometown in Shigatse: the blue sky is filled with white clouds, and the beautiful river is filled with green waves. An eagle flies by here, leaving behind a moving song. It was the pearl of the plateau, and was also known as the most beautiful manor. But on this day, this beautiful manor was destined to be baptized by war and completely turned into scorched ruins. The person in charge of this Xingcha ship was Tobagwe's most capable follower, Tuobahong. In modern terms, Although Tuoba Hong also had the blood of the Tuoba family, he had long been out of the family, so he could not be regarded as the blood of the Tuoba family. Naturally, he did not have the qualifications to worship the ancestors of the Tuoba family. Here was what needed to be mentioned. Whether it was the Tuoba family, the Xianyuan family, or the Dongfang family, there were too many people like Tuoba Hong. Their birth status was far lower than the average Tuoba family member, so they needed to work harder than most people, and even risk their lives. As long as they could get the approval of the family, then they could marry a direct woman of the Tuoba family, and through this way of marriage, they could consolidate and improve their status in the family. And this was the common promotion mechanism in big families. Even Tobagwe wanted to climb up, so how could Tuoba Hong, who was at the bottom of the family, not want to climb up? Therefore, after Tuoba Hong received the order from Tobagwe, he was more excited than anyone else. It was like soldiers only cared about when the military pay was paid. In Tuoba Hong's eyes, this was not a war at all, but a great thing for him to get credit for. Since Tobagwe had clearly stated that he wanted to kill everyone on this planet, then he would kill. The more he killed, the better. Tuoba Hong came to the sky above Shigatse, and after glancing at the city below, he could not help but show a satisfied smile. This is it, let's start. His tone was calm, but the expression on his face was particularly excited. After seeing his two companions nodding in response, Tuoba Hong could no longer hold back the excitement in his heart, and directly stood on the bow of the ship and made a gesture. 5 elements spell, Raging Inferno. This spell was temporarily taught to everyone by Tobagwe. After all, compared to the 4 elements of metal, wood, water and earth, the fire element spell was obviously stronger in terms of destructive power. And with Tuoba Hong's brazen move, a flame comparable to the scorching sun appeared over the city out of thin air. The area of the flame was as big as a basketball court. Before it fell to the ground, a heat wave swept over the city. Fire! Fire! Put out the fire! The flame hit an apartment building, and the fire instantly engulfed the entire building. The sudden fire seemed to have alarmed the entire city. People rushed to the streets and looked up blankly in the direction of the rising smoke. But just when everyone looked up to watch the fun, one after another, huge flames, like flints thrown by ancient catapults, crazily smashed into the center of the city in front of everyone. Why did flames suddenly fall from the sky? Was this a natural disaster? Or was it the wrath of God? No one knew the reason, just as no one could see Tuoba Hong in the sky. The devout believers immediately knelt on the ground, wailing and begging Buddha for forgiveness. But they didn't even have time to complete the ritual, and their bodies had been completely engulfed by the fire. Cool. So cool. Let's go to the next place. Tuoba Hong laughed and glanced at the city below, then directly called his companions and left. No way, this planet was too big. They had few people, so naturally, it was impossible to really kill them all. So after a fire hurriedly burned Shigatse, Tuoba Hong immediately turned the bow and sailed all the way to India according to the previously established route. And this was the action plan drawn up by Tobagwe in order to contain Qinshi. Wherever Xingcha passed, it would become a purgatory of fire in the world. Chapter 487. One after another, Xingcha landed all over the world. While Tuoba Hong was burning Shigaze, the rest of the teams also launched an attack on the cities below. From the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, from Asia to Africa, from Wuxia to the United States, from Shigaze to Kathmandu. Any city with a large population was bound to become the priority target of Tuoba Hong and his team. Everything was as Yuhuan Tianzuan said. The indigenous people on this planet were too weak. If it weren't for Qinshi, who came out of nowhere, the earth would have long become Tiandu's new home. In order to successfully persuade Tobagwe, Yuhuan Tianzuan provided the shadow stone they had left when they fought with Qinshi in the outside world. The shadow stone recorded the entire process of the fight between the two sides in detail. And this was obviously what really moved Tobagwe. Qinshi fought with Tiandu twice. The first time ended with the mysterious woman's rescue, and the second time ended with Yuhuan Tianzuan opening the Sun-Moon Star Array. With Yuhuan Tianzuan's character, How could he honestly give both shadow stones to Taobague? Compared with Tiandu, Chunxi's biggest disadvantage was not strength, but influence. Although Chunxi's personal strength was strong, he was only one person after all, not a large organization with many eyes and ears and followers. He came alone. He also went alone. Even if he could block millions of lions with one sword, it was still difficult to resist the treachery behind his back. Everything was going according to plan. Therefore, at the same time that Tao Bahong and his team launched the attack, Yuhuan Tianzuan on the moon also began their operation to break the array. With the 7 Sky Lords as the leader, the Divine Generals and Star Lords as the assistants. With all their strength, they broke through this array. When the surging true essence collided with the array, Chunxi finally noticed the strangeness. At this moment, he was accompanying the little guy in the yard to find the sense of qi, and teaching the little guy how to draw qi into the body and refine the essence into qi. The sudden change suddenly made Chunxi slightly absent-minded. However, Chunxi didn't even have time to figure out the reason carefully. The little guy's slightly puzzled voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Dad. Look there. What is that? Is the sun falling?" Hearing this, Chunxi quickly raised his head and looked in the direction the little guy was pointing. But he saw that in the sky thousands of meters high, a huge flame appeared out of thin air. Looking from a distance, the flame was like the sun, smashing toward Shangjing City at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Chen couldn't help but be startled. But soon after, a burst of uncontrollable anger suddenly rose in his heart. You're courting death." Since the seal had been touched, it meant that Yuhuan Tianzuan was forcefully breaking through the formation, so Chunxi obviously did not take the sudden appearance of the fire in front of him to heart. With a ruthless howl, a long sword formed from true essence appeared out of thin air above the courtyard. Then, like a meteor, the long sword instantly cut through the sky and shot straight towards the ball of flames. Bam! With a muffled sound, the ball of flames completely turned into a cloud of white smoke and dissipated. Fortunately, it was afternoon and the sun was shining brightly in the sky, so not many people noticed the abnormality just now. "Nian, wait for me here obediently. Daddy will be right back." Just as Yuhuan Tianzuan had guessed, Chunxi's first reaction was to rush to the moon to settle the score with him. However, as he soared into the sky and spread out his divine sense, Chunxi suddenly discovered there were signs of true essence fluctuations in the air. Chunxi followed these fluctuations all the way and almost instantly came to the front of one of the Xingcha. "Who are you? Why are you making trouble here?" After using true essence to forcibly stop the Xingcha, Chunxi frowned and looked at the 3 people on the ship. Seeing this, the 3 men of sacrifice on the ship did not even bat an eyelid, and directly launched the fiercest attack towards him. Courting death. These men of sacrifice were only at the gold core stage. In front of Chunxi, they were not even ants. The current situation was urgent. Yuhuan Tianzuan was still breaking the formation, so Chunxi did not have time to play the game of torture with them. So he directly used a secret method on the 3 people on the ship. Soul snatching. Later, Chunxi finally understood everything. Although these men of sacrifice were brainwashed every once in a while, they still clearly remembered the last order given by Tabague. That was kill. Wherever they go, kill without mercy. Since Chunxi knew the cause and effect, there were only 2 choices in front of him. Either he immediately rushed to the moon and beheaded Tiandu on the spot, or he immediately rushed to all parts of the world to stop the killing of the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. If he chose the former, then with the lethality of immortal cultivators to ordinary people, it was estimated that before Chunxi succeeded in defeating the 7 Sky Lords, human beings would be declared extinct first. What a vicious plan! What a vicious heart! Yuhuan Tianzuan was determined that he would not leave the earth alone. This was the angriest day in Chunxi's life. On one hand, it was because Yuhuan Tianzuan's behavior really touched his bottom line. On the other hand, it was completely because he was annoyed with his own inaction. Knowing that the 9-star alignment meant the opening of the seal, he did not make any defensive preparations in advance. The reason was very simple. Because Chunxi had always prided himself as an ordinary person, So from the moment of his return, he only wanted to be like an ordinary person, to have an ordinary and happy family, to live an ordinary and happy life. Chunxi had truly achieved a small recluse in the wild, and a large recluse in the city. But it was precisely because of this he was found an opportunity by Yuhuan Tianzuan, and successfully exploited such a big loophole. Thinking of this, Chunxi couldn't wait to rush to the moon immediately and tear Yuhuan Tianzuan into pieces with his own hands. But the current situation forced him to stay on Earth. After all, if he delayed here for a second, another city might become a sea of fire. In the face of those ruthless immortal cultivators, what could the poor human beings do to resist? In desperation, Chunxi had to look up in the direction of the moon, and fiercely gritted his teeth and directly made his heart demon oath. Yuhuan Tianzuan, Yuhuan Tianzuan. What a good Yuhuan Tianzuan! Don't you like to make a heart demon oath? Then I, Chunxi, will also make a heart demon oath today. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear that I am not human. His mouth contained the heavenly law, and his words were law. If there was any disobedience, there would be no hope for the heavenly law in this life. Chapter 488. It was broad daylight, and the universe was clear and bright. After Chunxi made the heart demon oath, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up. Subsequently, a surge of incomparably surging true essence, like a huge tide, suddenly spread out with Chunxi's body as the center. They saw he stood alone above the 9 heavens. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making flapping sounds. When the divine sword Dharma idol condensed and took shape, Chunxi grabbed the sword hilt and took 7 steps in the air. After 7 steps, he suddenly pointed the long sword in his hand to the sky. At the same time, he shouted with a fierce expression, "Rise!" In an instant, tens of thousands of divine sword Dharma idols connected and formed beside him. When he raised his sword, tens of thousands of swords suddenly arrived. I'd like to see who on earth dares to behave atrociously in my territory. Before his voice fell, Chunxi's entire person had completely turned into a stream of light, directly disappearing in midair. The densely packed divine sword Dharma idols followed closely behind Chunxi. From afar, the long swords in the sky were like giant dragons dancing in the air. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced on any enemy they encountered along the way. Following the signs of vital essence fluctuations, Chunxi killed all the way from North China to South China, and then from East China to West China. At that moment, he was the last guardian of this divine land. Under the absolute suppression of the realm, the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family could not even see Chunxi's appearance clearly. One after another, the long swords directly pierced through their bodies. At the same time, they destroyed the Xingcha that they relied on to survive. Chunxi's speed was already fast enough, but there were still many cities that had completely turned into a sea of fire. Time was tight, and Chunxi did not even have time to participate in the rescue operation of each city. Therefore, he could only hurriedly cause a storm over these cities. Then he turned around and ran to the next target. Although the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family were weak, they relied on their numbers and were scattered in every corner of the world. They acted almost at the same time. Therefore, by the time Chunxi had completely wiped out the men of sacrifice in Wuxia, nearly 2 minutes had passed. This was simply a time race. Now it was time to see who could reach the finish line first. At this time, far away near the moon, Tobagwe was also aware of the situation on Earth. Tobagwe had a magic tool in his hands. Through this magic tool, he could immediately know the situation of each follower. It had to be known that Tobagwe had sent out a total of 435 followers for this trip. After sending all these people out, there were only 15 people left, including Tuoba Xiao. Tobagwe had truly gone all out this time. But he never would have thought. From the moment these people set off to the moment they fell, the time it took to brew a cup of tea had not even passed. In such a short period of time, nearly 100 of his followers had perished. At this rate, it was estimated that the owner of the ruins, whom he had never met before, would kill his way to the moon in less than 30 minutes. Thus, when Tobagwe learned of this, the excitement on his face immediately turned into endless anxiety. It was too fast. These people had died too fast. In the shadow stone that Yuhuan Tianzuan had given to Tobague, Chunxi's cultivation was only at the peak of soul formation. But with this speed, how could an Empyrean achieve it? From the beginning to the end, Tobague did not know what realm the enemy he was facing was at. Yuhuan Tianzuan had lied to him, saying that Chunxi was only a gatekeeper, and that the pure sky saint ancestor was the culprit behind the imprisonment of Tiandu. For this reason, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not hesitate to make a heart demon oath to deceive Tobague. Tobague believed it. So he stood on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side. But now that things had come to this, it was useless to say so much. He could only blame himself for being greedy. He did not go to Earth to investigate in advance, and listen to Yuhuan Tianzuan's side of the story. So even if Tobague regretted at this moment that he should not have believed Yuhuan Tianzuan's bewitchment, he had no choice but to release the arrow. Hurry! Hurry! He's going to kill us! Tobague stood at the bow of the ship and shouted crazily. While he was extremely anxious, how could Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan not be extremely nervous as well? Both sides were competing for time. Tobague had done everything he could. If he could not break through the array now, when Chunxi was free, how would Tiandu deal with his anger? So Yuhuan Tianzuan's heart was not as relaxed as Tobague's. Under his command, after the Tiandu people failed to break through the array for the third time, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally could not help but look up to the sky and roar. Then he threw out the jade disc glass cup in his hand. The jade disc glass cup was a top treasure left behind by the pure sky saint ancestor. After Yuhuan Tianzuan ascended to the position of Empyrean, he used his own blood essence to refine this magic treasure. So this magic treasure had long been related to his life. In the past, Yuhuan Tianzuan would never have been willing to detonate this rare treasure. But at this time, he had no other choice. Therefore, after throwing out the jade disc glass cup in his hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly formed a seal. Bang! The moment the jade disc glass cup hit the array, the entire moon seemed to tremble. This supreme magic treasure that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years finally completed its final mission at this moment. From now on, the name of the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man would only exist in legends. Under Yuhuan Tianzuan's unscrupulous attack, the array suddenly collapsed, turning into a burst of smoke and dissipating. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan forcefully endured the impact to his divine soul from detonating his natal magic treasure. He turned around to look at the divine generals and star venerables behind him before abruptly swinging his sleeves and ordering everyone, "Let's go." Then, with Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader, the remnants of Tiandu rushed to the giant ship that carried their future. At the same time, Chunxi, who was on Earth, also sensed everything. The moment the array was destroyed, he instinctively wanted to chase after them and stop them. But the raging fire in the city below made him stop in his tracks. Although he was confident that he could stop Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan's group, it was possible that those damned bastards would burn down another populous city. How to make a choice had really become a big problem. Chunxi was really hesitant. But at this moment, a voice that was not inferior to the sound of nature suddenly rang in his ears. "Mr. Chun, I'm here to help you." Hearing this, Chunxi quickly looked back. He saw that Jiang Yan was hurrying in his direction with 300 divine generals from Daiyu Island. The strength of Daiyu Island was not bad. Not only were they all golden core cultivators, but there were also many Yuanying among them. Therefore, as soon as Jiang Yan and his people appeared, Chunxi could not help but smile. "Good that you're here. I owe you today, and I'll repay you in the future." Hearing Chunxi's words, this cunning old man could not help but laugh. "Sir, you don't have to do this. The divine land gave birth to us. Now that our homeland is in danger, how can we stand by and do nothing?" At this point, Jiang Yan suddenly changed the topic and asked in a probing tone, "Sir, you seem to have something urgent to deal with? Why don't you leave this to us first? Those bastards are just divine generals. Why do you need to do it yourself?" "Okay, then I'll leave this to you. I'll be right back." Before her voice fell, Chunxi's entire person had already completely turned into a stream of light, instantly disappearing before Jiang Yan's eyes. Seeing this, Jiang Yan could not help but smile faintly. He looked at the sky thoughtfully, then waved his sleeves gently and calmly ordered the people behind him, "Go, hurry up." Yes. Chapter 489. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the glass cup as the price and finally succeeded in breaking the array. At that moment, the most excited one was not Yuhuan Tianzuan, but Tobague, who had been waiting anxiously. Quick, quick, quick. Tobague stood at the bow of the ship and kept waving to everyone. In fact, at this time, why would he need to urge them? After the formation was broken, with Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan in the lead, the remaining several thousand people in Tiandu rushed toward the enormous star Cha in a grandiose manner. This was the third time Tiandu had to move. For the arrogant divine generals and star monarchs, when had they ever been in such a sorry state? Therefore, after everyone boarded the ship, they each found a corner and waited silently for the starship to start. The morale was a little low, but thinking about it, it was understandable. After all, Chunshi was like a dark cloud hanging over everyone's head. As long as they didn't escape from his clutches, this dark cloud would continue to bring endless trouble to people. Venerable, is everyone here? After Yuhuan Tianzuan boarded the ship, Tobague immediately put on a warm smile. Looking at his current flattering appearance, where was the calmness when bargaining with Yuhuan Tianzuan? Instead, he was more like a waiter in a tea house. This was the reality. It must be known that the sealed Yuhuan Tianzuan and the freed Yuhuan Tianzuan were two completely different concepts. Tobague was very smart, and of course he was also very sensible. Since Yuhuan Tianzuan had been freed, then the resentment that made him angry should naturally all turn into clouds and dissipate with the wind. So, Tobague instantly adjusted his mentality. From now on, his fate would be closely related to Yuhuan Tianzuan in front of him. And Emperor Yuhuan seemed to be very satisfied with Tobague's change from arrogance to respect. He nodded gently, and after looking thoughtfully at the blue planet in the distance, he directly ordered to Tobague, "There's no time to lose, let's go." Yes. After receiving Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, Tobague immediately rushed to the rudder, and then directly inserted the high-grade spirit stone that he had prepared in advance. With the continuous influx of spirit energy, the huge starship suddenly trembled slightly. Tobague turned the rudder, adjusted the direction, and shouted to everyone, "We are about to set sail, please sit tight." At that moment, Tobague was like Columbus returning from a rewarding journey. Although he had lost hundreds of loyal followers, compared to the harvest of this trip, what was that loss? As long as he successfully brought Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others back to Supreme Palace enclosure, then he would be the greatest meritorious service. What kind of impact would this have on the current situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure? Thinking of this, he couldn't help himself. But what Tobague didn't. Just as he gripped the rudder and was about to set off, a terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to palpitate suddenly came from afar. The strength of this pressure was enough to make one's legs go soft. What's more, there was obviously a monstrous killing intent. What's going on? Tobague was startled by this killing intent that seemed to have materialized into reality. After reacting, he wanted to control the starship enclosure to directly perform a space jump. But unfortunately, before the starship enclosure could perform a space jump, it must be in a high-speed flying state. So Tobague could only push the starship enclosure with all his strength, hoping to escape from this terrible place as soon as possible. The starship enclosure needed to be accelerated before it could perform a space jump, but Chen Shi, who had already mastered the true meaning of the word void, didn't need to. Therefore, after a few breaths of time, his figure had already appeared not far behind the starship enclosure, and was clearly reflected in the eyes of everyone on the ship. In everyone's sight, Chen Shi arrived suddenly on 10,000 swords, like a soaring dragon roaming in the void, like the Milky Way hanging upside down on 3 stone beams. Before he arrived, the strong and unparalleled pressure on his body had already pressed everyone to the point of suffocation. At that moment, a nightmare seemed to have become a reality. "Everyone, listen to my order, array!" Unlike Tobague, who was at a loss, Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously mentally prepared to be caught up by Chen Shi in advance. Therefore, as soon as Chunxi appeared, everyone on the ship launched an attack at him at the same time. In an instant, a dense amount of true yuan qi shot out like laser cannons, bringing along a dazzling stream of light as it smashed towards Chunxi. Whether it was a Star Lord or a divine general, everyone couldn't wait to use all their skills in an instant, only hoping that everyone could work together to strangle this terrible enemy here. In the face of so many people attacking at the same time, even Chunxi didn't dare to face them head-on. Therefore his figure flashed, and suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. Where is he? Where did he go? The killing move that everyone on the ship had been preparing for a long time missed just like that. No one knew where Chunxi had gone, so they subconsciously turned their heads to look for her. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Don't panic! Be careful! Don't let down your guard! Although this person's cultivation is high, we have many people in Tiandu. He definitely won't dare to fight us head-on, so he can only hide in the dark and wait for an opportunity to sneak attack, trying to defeat us one by one. Everyone, don't be distracted, don't fall into his tricks." After Yuhuan Tianzuan said this, everyone calmed down, so they released their divine sense, hoping to find Chunxi's trace in the first place. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly turned around and asked Tobague anxiously, "How long will it take?" 3 breaths. Only 3 breaths. Note: 1 breath is about 2 to 3 seconds. Tobague gave a very positive reply. Xingcha had been accelerating. As long as she successfully accelerated to the state of space jump, then even if Chunxi was a supreme, he wouldn't be able to attack them in this state. In fact, from the moment he saw Tobague, Yuhuan Tianzuan had already made various plans in his heart. According to Tobague's description, there should be many supreme-level existences in Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, if Chunxi was really determined to pursue and beat them up today, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan would at most drag the battlefield to Supreme Palace enclosure. He didn't believe that no one could stop Chunxi. Heavenly Venerate Yu Huan had calculated everything, but the only thing he hadn't expected was, in order to kill him, Chunxi didn't even hesitate to make a heart demon oath. Therefore, the moment he talked to Tobague, Chunxi's figure appeared from the void. This was the anger from Huaxia's bloodline. Of all the things Emperor Yuhuan shouldn't have done, the thing he shouldn't have done the most was to treat the lives of mortals as grass. Thus he had to die. The moment Chunxi appeared, the long sword in his hand drew a cold light in the air. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd Style. 10,000 swords returned to origin. Chunxi's appearance was very sudden. Besides Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was closest to him, almost no one reacted. Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan instinctively wanted to block it. But what he never thought was, Chunxi's sword tip didn't point directly at him, but at the side. Tobague. Chapter 490. First of all, Xingcha could barely be regarded as a magic weapon. Especially this kind of large Xingcha. It needed the master's blood essence to feed it. After it was completely refined, it could be controlled at will. Therefore, the first thing Chunxi wanted to kill was not Yuhuan Tianzuan, but Tobague. In addition, there was also an analogy here. If Chunxi was compared to a tiger, then Tiandu's group was naturally a flock of sheep. In terms of individual combat strength, a sheep could never be a tiger's opponent. But if thousands of sheep charged at the same time, even a ferocious tiger would have to obediently retreat to the side. The strength of an individual could never be compared to the strength of a group. Therefore, Chunxi could only use a sneak attack to drag the sheep out of the flock one by one, and then kill them one by one. From the beginning, Chunxi's goal was very clear. So as soon as he appeared, he perfectly displayed the strength of a supreme being. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd move. 10,000 swords returned to origin. The long sword behind Chunxi was like a giant dragon. After emerging from the void, it smashed down at Tobague at an extremely fast speed. Its speed was fast, and its momentum was spectacular. It was like a waterfall that swallowed mountains and rivers. In an instant, it brought a huge suffocating pressure to everyone present. Tobague was in the center of the vortex. His feeling was naturally more profound than others. And it was precisely because of this. As soon as Chunxi appeared, Tobagwe keenly felt that he was locked on by Chunxi's aura. So he immediately raised all the vital essence in his body and forcibly propped up a protective aura shield. At the same time, he did not forget to urgently send a voice transmission to Yuhuan Tianzuan. "Venerable, save me." At this moment, Tobagwe really regretted it. Chunxi did not care about Emperor Yuhuan, and instead made a special trip to find trouble with him, a small fry. Wasn't it obvious that he wanted to kill him, then seize control of the Xingcha, and finally slowly kill everyone on the ship? And at this time, if Tobagwe still didn't know Chunxi's true strength, then he really would be too stupid. Supreme Martial Artist. This was a living supreme being. He was in big trouble today. In just a flash, tens of thousands of swords smashed into Tobagwe's protective astral shield. He didn't even have time to react before he spat out a large mouthful of blood from the shockwave of the true chi. Poof! His protective shield shattered with the sound. Tobagwe's eyes flashed with despair. A mirthless smile suddenly appeared on his face. Just what did he, Tobagwe, deserve to die under the sovereign's sword today? Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be a kind of honor. Humans would always have some different feelings before they died. Tobagwe had already mentally prepared himself. But at this critical juncture, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and risked his life to block this fatal blow for him. Of course, this person couldn't be Tuoba Xiao. Moreover, Tuoba Xiao didn't have such ability. Therefore, when this person risked his life to block this blow for Tobagwe, even Chunxi couldn't help but show a trace of surprise. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The focus of the audience was on this figure. This person, wasn't it Yuhuan Tianzuan? No one could smoothly block the full blow of a supreme martial artist. Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, the moment the tens of thousands of swords arrived, the energy around Yuhuan Tianzuan's body suddenly stagnated. The protective shield also cracked and collapsed. In front of an insightful Void Realm expert, a Divine Transformation Realm expert had no ability to resist. But even so, Yuhuan Tianzuan had no intention of retreating. He looked up to the sky and roared. The defensive magic weapon on his body suddenly bloomed with a burst of brilliant light. Even if a supreme martial artist is above, I will not retreat half a step. In an instant, the body of the 10 celestial sovereigns, who had been in a high position for a long time, burst out with a tenacious fighting spirit that didn't fear death. Bang! 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 10,000 swords returned to origin was very different from other moves. This move sword chi was vigorous and long. After the move was released, it was like a huge wave. Wave after wave bombarded the enemy's body continuously until the attack was completely eliminated. Under such a violent collision, the people on the ship naturally reacted at this moment. Then they spontaneously attacked Chunxi. Seeing that things were not going well, Chunxi could only hurriedly withdraw his true essence, and then escape into the void again. This was the method of an insightful emptiness. His movements were erratic and formless, making it impossible for others to detect his presence. When Chunxi disappeared like this, the people no longer attacked randomly. Instead, they rushed forward like a swarm of bees and hurriedly protected Yuhuan Tianzuan in the center. Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan's situation was not very good, Celestial Sovereign Xuanjin immediately stepped forward to support him. Then he asked with concern, "Yuhuan, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Yuhuan Tianzuan clearly suffered a heavy blow from Chunxi, but at this moment, it was as if nothing had happened. Other than his pale face, Celestial Sovereign Xuanjin could not see any injuries on his body. Celestial Sovereign Xuanjin seemed to want to ask something. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly waved his hand and quickly ordered the people. "Formation. The crisis is not over yet. Don't be distracted." As expected, before Yuhuan Tianzuan's voice died away, Chunxi's figure once again appeared in front of everyone's eyes. He had missed the best opportunity when he missed his attack just now. At present, most of the remaining Heaven Capital troops were concentrated near the rudder. Even Chunxi did not have the confidence to break their formation in an instant. Therefore, he could only move to the stern of the ship and concentrate all his true essence on his hand. This time, he did not use a sword. Instead, he chose a saber that he did not use often. The sword was nimble and the saber was strong and fierce. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity. One saber was enough. The third move of the Flaming Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaving the sky. They saw. The moment Chunxi appeared, he was already holding the saber with both hands. The tip of the saber was pointed at the sky. Such a powerful move. Even if it had not been used yet, its power could not be concealed. When Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan sensed the commotion, his expression immediately changed. He shouted fiercely at the crowd, "Quick! Stop him!" Hearing this, everyone turned around, wanting to launch a joint attack on Chunxi again. But could their speed be faster than Chunxi? So the moment everyone turned around, Chunxi drew his saber. At that moment, he was like a god descending, proudly standing above all living beings. Man and saber became one. The saber aura suddenly came into being, as if it was going to destroy everything in its path. It made it impossible for people to avoid it. This was the simplest, most direct, and also the most unfancy saber. With an unparalleled domineering aura, it slashed towards the incomparably huge Xingcha. Didn't Yuhuan Tianzuan want to ride Xingcha to Supreme Palace enclosure? Since he couldn't kill Tabague, he might as well destroy this ship. As long as Xingcha was destroyed, with the flying speed of Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, when would they be able to fly to Supreme Palace enclosure? The journey to the stars is long and the sky is high. Don't worry, I will play with you slowly. Chapter 491. 3 Breaths. It took less than 10 seconds. After Yuhuan Tianzuan sacrificed himself to block Qinshi's attack for Tabague, who had narrowly escaped death, pinned all his hopes on Xingcha. At that moment, Tabague only felt that his mind was blank. Everything in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with him anymore. The only thing that could attract his attention was this faintly fluorescent high-grade spirit stone in front of him. As long as this high-grade spirit stone in front of him suddenly bloomed, it meant that Xingcha could perform a space jump. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. When Tabague exhaled a mouthful of turbid air for the 3rd time, his eyes suddenly burst with a burst of light, and the excitement on his face was even more indescribable. However, what Tabague didn't know was just as he was excited, Chunxi, who was standing proudly at the stern of the ship, also slashed out with the long saber in his hand. Red Sun Saber Technique's 3rd move, one saber cleaves the sky. This was a saber condensed from the true essence of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Chunxi hadn't even slashed out, but this saber light was already like a pillar supporting the sky, instantly increasing by hundreds of times. In terms of length, it was even much longer than the huge Xingcha in front of him. Break for me! Chunxi roared, and he finally slashed out with the saber in his hand. This saber light drew a perfect arc in the air at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye. It flashed from top to bottom. Its speed was so fast that it made people speechless. The people on the ship didn't even have time to react before the saber light flashed past their eyes. It's over. Yuhuan Tianzuan watched all this happen, but he was powerless to stop it. But just when he was in despair, a burst of extremely strong light suddenly bloomed in front of Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes. The light was so dazzling that it was even brighter than the afternoon sun. At that moment, time stood still. It was truly still, because Xingcha had successfully entered the space jump state. Too late. Chunxi had always been outside Xingcha's defensive array formation, so when Xingcha performed the space jump, she did not bring him along with her. Therefore, he could only watch as Xingcha turned into a ray of light and disappeared from his sight. The entire world finally quieted down. Chunxi turned his head to look at Mars, which was not far away from him, and then turned back to look in the direction of Earth. The azure blue planet was still floating there quietly. This scene was very familiar to Chunxi. Just like the day he returned, this azure planet was also quietly floating there. At that time, Nianyan was only a little over 4 years old. In the blink of an eye, Nianyan was almost 7 years old. That's right, when this spring is over and summer comes again, Nianyan was 7 years old. A second ago, Chunshi was still busy killing people, but in the next second, she suddenly thought of her daughter. Just like that, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the others slipped away right in front of him. However, he didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. Instead, he was like a lunatic as he floated in space and laughed foolishly. But the good thing was his gaffe did not last long. After raising his hand and making a flying kiss gesture toward Earth, Chunshi immediately put away the smile on his face. Nian Nian, wait for me, Dad will be back soon. After saying that, Chunshi took a deep look at the azure blue planet in front of him, then immediately turned around and followed the law threads left behind by Xingcha. Run. Run to where? So what if he ran to the ends of the earth? He had to keep his word. If he said he would kill your whole family, he would definitely kill your whole family. Otherwise, how could Chunshi continue to live? Unlike Changhua and Yi, the two brats who ran away from home, Tobague brought enough high-grade spirit stones on this trip. Therefore, after successfully getting rid of Chunshi, Tobague did not stop for a moment. Every time Xingcha completed a jump, he would immediately replace it with a new high-grade spirit stone. After Xingcha completed the 7th jump, Tobague finally breathed a sigh of relief. He turned around and announced to everyone, "Everyone, we are home." Tobague probably emphasized the word home. Naturally, there was no need to explain the meaning behind his words. We're home. Hearing this, everyone on the ship could not help but look at each other. Just a second ago, they were still struggling under the shadow of Chunshi. How did they suddenly reach their destination in the next second? So fast. You don't have to doubt, please look. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure. After saying that, Tobague came to the guardrail, then smiled and pointed to a place not far ahead. A continental plate quietly floating in the universe. If the universe was compared to the sea and the earth was compared to a basketball, then this continent was a small sampan in the sea. This was the Supreme Palace enclosure, an existence that seriously violated the common sense of physics. However, its existence also indirectly proved that the ancient people's conjecture was correct. That is, the sky was round and the earth was round. The Supreme Palace enclosure did not have a sea. At the end of the land was the boundless void of the universe. In addition, although the Supreme Palace enclosure was not a planet, it still had a layer of complex cloud structure similar to the atmosphere. Therefore, looking from a distance from Xingcha, it was actually more like a landscape rockery of a rich family. However, the area of this rockery was much larger than the earth. It was at least twice the size of the earth. Moreover, it did not have a large area occupied by the sea. The Supreme Palace enclosure has been divided into 9 provinces since ancient times. Shang, Han, Ning, Zhong, Lan, Wan, Yu, Yin, and Lei. My Tuoba family comes from the northernmost Ning province of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There is a saying, Ning province is in the north, Tuoba town is in the south. It means that my Tuoba family is in the south of Ning province. At such a close distance, it was impossible to use a space jump. Therefore, Tobague took advantage of this time to take the initiative to introduce the general situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure to Yuhuan Tianzuan. And when mentioning the Tuoba family, Tobague's entire state faintly changed. Thinking about it, was this the feeling of finding an organization? Tobague tried to introduce the strength of the Tuoba family to bring a certain amount of pressure to Yuhuan Tianzuan, so that Yuhuan Tianzuan would have no choice but to pay attention to him. But what he didn't expect was, even if the Supreme Palace enclosure was close at hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan's attention had not been on him. Instead, he looked back from time to time to look behind Xingcha. Seeing this, Tobague couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He finally remembered that he was still being chased by a supreme powerhouse. Just now, I deliberately chose the wrong direction to jump back and forth twice. It should be impossible for them to catch up so quickly, right? A reply came from home, saying that the patriarch is personally bringing people to support. As long as the patriarch arrives, my little life should be saved, right? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not in the mood to talk, Tobague also obediently shut his mouth. At this time, there was a sudden movement from the stern of the ship, so that everyone on the ship was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. They were so scared that they all put on an attack posture. Kacha! Everyone focused their eyes and saw that the Xingqiao was suddenly divided into two. The entire stern of the ship was cut off. It turned out that Chunxi's saber was not ineffective. It was just that at that time, Xingqiao had already reached the critical point of the space jump. So even if Xingqiao had been cut in half, she still successfully reached the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was a false alarm. It's fine, it's fine. Tobague was frightened out of his wits. After recovering, he immediately laughed and signaled everyone not to be nervous. If it was destroyed, so be it. Anyway, he was already at this position. Even if he flew slowly, it wouldn't take long to reach his destination. Chapter 492. I'm very puzzled. Why is there more and more rhythm recently? Is it the first day that I started to update every day? If I remember correctly, I've already updated every day for half a year, and there were 4 months in between where I updated every 2 days. Of course, I can understand. Saying that I'm slow is actually a disguised form of urging me to update. Covering face shyly. So I want to thank everyone for their continuous support. Every comment, every monthly vote, every recommendation ticket, every tip you gave me. Actually, I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Now let's talk about the reason for updating every day. My reason is actually very good. Because I want to improve. From the external data, this book seems to be completely dead, but my royalties didn't decrease at all. Because of the channel bonus, if I update one more chapter every day, my monthly income will increase by at least 1 to 20,000. I'm not saying this to show off, but to prove I'm really not writing books for money. I just want to write better. If it's to make money, then from the day this book was published, my word count skyrocketed. My annual income is at least 500,000 if not 1 million. I need to announce the results here. This book's current average order is 11,000, but the high order has reached 60,000. This 60,000 does not only refer to a single chapter, but it refers to the nearly 30 chapters that started to be published. After that, it began to plummet. 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, and now more than 1,000. It will probably continue to fall. I'm not writing well, but I did write well before I published it. Actually, I'm not very satisfied with the chapters before I published it, because at that time, I made a lot of rookie mistakes, but I'm too lazy to change them. Then here's the question. Why did I write so well in the beginning, but the latter part is so bad? The answer is actually very simple. Because this is my first book that exceeds 1 million words. I can say without reservation, for more than a year, I've really put in a lot of effort. But my ability is limited. I've never had any long experience before. At most, I wrote 400,000 words. When I published it, it exceeded this number. So I've been stumbling along the way. Once half a step to become a god. Now it's completely dead. Can you guess how wonderful the journey of my heart is? I don't blame anyone, I don't even blame myself. Because I'm very clear. I really don't have the ability. My first book was published in 2005 at starting point. During this period he kept writing, but he still couldn't reach the standard of signing a contract. It was only when he wrote this book that he seemed to have had an epiphany and suddenly became famous. So don't compete with me in terms of reading volume, and don't act all high and mighty in front of me, because I really thought it was ridiculous. Let's not talk about those that we've seen before, for example, the most popular ones recently. Haunted House, Machinist, Best Friend, Best Son-in-Law. Even when the lifestyle game was just released, I could already guess that it had 10,000 subscribers when it only had 80,000 words. But reading a book and writing a book were two different things. He had clearly thought of the plot in his head, but when he wrote it out, the flavor would always change. This was the so-called power of the brush. I had absolutely no control over what I wanted to write. This was also the main reason why many rookies couldn't even sign a contract. All this time, I've been thinking about it over and over. Think about how to improve yourself. To be honest, I've improved a lot. After all, he had been writing for so many years. His basic skills were still very solid. Now that he had the experience of 10,000 orders, if he didn't improve, then wouldn't he be a fool? But because the framework of cultivation Dad had already been established, I couldn't express it at all. I could only continue writing according to the existing framework. Writing a book was actually like building a house. The foundation of this book was clearly the foundation of a villa, but after I built the foundation, I simply built a straw shed on top of it. Now, I didn't want to live in a straw shed. I wanted to build a villa on top of the straw shed. Then, other than tearing it down and rebuilding it, was there any other way? This was writing a book. Many people would choose to tear down the bridge and rebuild it. I was different. Since I couldn't live in a villa, I would renovate the straw shed. That was my idea. It was such a simple idea that it was somewhat inexplicable. And this was also the fundamental reason why I continued to persevere. Because I had once stood at the top of the mountain, I saw a different scenery. Now I had fallen to the bottom of the valley. But because of that unexpected experience, I couldn't help but look at the top of the mountain. The mountain man asked me, "Do you have hatred in your heart?" I answered, "No hatred." Then he asked, "Why?" At that moment, my answer was so firm. "Thank you for letting me see the scenery at the top of the mountain. If I fell, then so be it. I'll just walk again. But the next time, I want to walk more steadily. Slower, more steadily." That was all. March 3, 2019, early morning. The west window opened. Oh right, this isn't a Unix declaration. The sun will rise as usual tomorrow. The west window will be as usual. Wax, love you guys. Chapter 493. Formation. As soon as he heard these words, Tobague was so scared that he began to tremble. He looked in the direction that Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan was pointing at, and saw that a beam of light had appeared diagonally above Xingcha at some point in time. Furthermore, it was rapidly flying in their direction. From a distance, this light was like a meteor. After drawing a beautiful straight line in the sky, it directly smashed in front of everyone. Bang! Before the person arrived, the sword arrived. Sure enough, it was Chunxi chasing after them again. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not seem to be very surprised. His face turned cold, and then he ordered everyone in a loud voice, "5 divine generals, take your positions. Activate the innate 5 direction flags and set up the heavenly cycle stars formation. Rise." As soon as this order came out, there was a small commotion on the ship. What needed to be mentioned here was, after the Battle of Dragon Head Peak, the 5 divine generals of Tiandu and the Rakshasa Star Lord had lost a lot of people, so Yuhuan Tianzuan could only temporarily choose suitable successors from the existing survivors. These people's strength was not bad, but they had not undergone systematic training, so the moment they heard Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, they seemed a little flustered. To think that our Huang Tiandu, to think that he would end up without a successor. It's really lamentable, lamentable. Looking at the clumsy positioning of these divine generals and star lords, Heavenly Lord Xuanjin could not help but sigh. Hearing this, the faces of the 6 heavenly lords, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, flashed with a trace of sadness. Once upon a time, Tiandu was so glorious and strong. But now, the remnants of Tiandu, led by the 10 directions heavenly lords, had become stray dogs at this moment. In order to avoid Chunxi's pursuit, they were in a state of panic all day long. When they were still in the solar system, the heavenly lords did not feel that there was anything wrong with escaping to the Supreme Palace enclosure. But when they really came to the Supreme Palace enclosure, and saw it floating quietly in the void, the celestial venerables suddenly felt a sense of helplessness from being outlanders. Yes, Earth was their home. It was just like how Tobague's home was in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Now that he had finally returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure, he would naturally be excited. This feeling of desolation was probably the so-called alone as a stranger in a strange land. Morale was low. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly asked Tuobasu, "How long until the reinforcements arrive?" Hearing this, Tobague was startled. He didn't seem to understand why Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't ask him directly, but instead asked him secretly. However, doubts were just doubts. Tobague honestly replied to Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sound transmission. The family has already given a clear reply, and the family head is on the way with people. According to my estimation, we'll be able to see the reinforcements in 30 minutes at most. Good. Then we'll hold on for another incense stick's worth of time. Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly at Tabague, then turned around and flew to the side of the high platform. He lowered his head and looked around the audience, then suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky, angrily roaring, "Hateful! Even if we abandon our home and flee to a foreign land, the thief is not willing to let us live. We have been forced into a corner. So I've decided, instead of being trampled on and humiliated like this, it's better to go all out and fight to the death with that evil thief. Yuhuan is here to ask everyone. Today, are you willing to fight with me?" As soon as these words came out, the audience boiled over. Before, everyone was busy running for their lives, so they couldn't raise any morale. Now that they had come to the Supreme Palace enclosure, this strange place in front of them seemed to give them infinite courage. That's right. They had even lost their home, so what was the use of keeping their lives? Where was the integrity of Tiandu? Where was the glory of Tiandu? After thinking of their last trace of dignity, everyone's fighting spirit was immediately summoned by Yuhuan Tianzuan. Fight! 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 The moment the massive heavenly cycle star formation was set up, a silver-white shield suddenly appeared around Xingcha, protecting her within. In fact, this formation was not a killing formation, but more like an auxiliary formation. Its biggest function was to connect everyone in the formation together, so that their vital essences could be intertwined and converge to achieve the purpose of glory and glory. No, the power of the formation has decreased by at least 30% after losing the central Wuji apricot yellow flag. Let me be the eye of the formation. After saying that, Heavenly Lord Xuanjin prepared to move to the lost corner. However, at this moment, Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan pulled him back without batting an eyelid, and then shook his head slightly. What's wrong? Heavenly Lord Xuanjin, who had always been straightforward, was confused. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was next to him, directly pulled him to his side and softly explained to him. What? After hearing Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's explanation, Heavenly Lord Xuanjin's expression was interesting. It turned out that Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted his subordinates to block the attack for him. Who did Chen Shi really want to kill? Wasn't it the Heavenly Lords present? As the leaders of Heaven Capital, the 7 of them were the real culprits that caused Earth to suffer. Since the 7 of them were no match for Chen Shi, then the best way. Obviously, they wanted their subordinates to block the attack. Now that the 7 of them were in the center of the formation, if Chen Shi wanted to successfully kill them, he had to break through the formation first. However, the formation connected everyone's lives tightly together. As the saying goes, unity is strength. If Chen Shi was determined to kill them, then he would kill everyone present first. It was just that these silly heavenly generals and star lords had been betrayed by Yuhuan Tianzuan, without realizing it. Instead, they firmly believed that they were fighting for their dignity. It was just like the slogan they chanted. Everything was for the prestige of the holy ancestor. Everything was for the glory of Heaven Capital. With the appearance of Chen Shi, the final battle between him and Heaven Capital finally began. The remaining half of Xingcha was still flying in the universe. The fairy-like Supreme Palace enclosure was not far ahead. However, this last stretch of distance, it turned the Xingcha into a purgatory on Earth. Chen Shi attacked fiercely again and again, but the formation dissolved them into nothingness time and time again. It was true that he was a supreme. However, in such a short period of time, even a supreme was somewhat helpless in the face of such a tenacious resistance from everyone. Chen Shi was somewhat confused. What was wrong with these people? Why did they suddenly become so fearless of death? As soon as he showed himself, all sorts of magical treasures and spells would be thrown at him. He slashed at the formation's shield again and again. With every slash, the violent impact caused by the collision of true essence would be instantly dispersed to everyone. In the face of such frequent attacks, those with lower cultivation would be shaken to the point that their heart meridians would be broken, and their 7 orifices would bleed. Even so, Every time someone could not withstand the strong impact brought about by Qin Shi, they would immediately rush out of the formation and use their last breath to detonate their golden core, temporarily relieving some pressure on their companions behind them. The 7 celestial venerables stood on the high platform and watched everything in front of them. Although he could not bear it, Celestial Venerable Xuanjin finally listened to Celestial Venerable Wondrous Spell's dissuasion. He stood on the high platform with the other Celestial Venerables and constantly pretended to gesture. Those who could cultivate to this level were not fools. Even ants wanted to live, so how could the Celestial Venerables not want to live? After all, they were the core of Heaven Capital, and at the same time, they were the future spark of Heaven Capital. As long as they could force Qin Shi to retreat and successfully enter the Supreme Palace enclosure, then Heaven Capital would usher in a new era. In the process of Xingqia flying to the Supreme Palace enclosure, the remnants of Heaven Capital fell one after another. Every time they self-destructed, it was like a festive firework, shining non-stop in this silent universe. After enduring for 3 breaths, another incense stick of time welcomed. Finally, after nearly half of the people on the ship were gone, a ray of light finally appeared in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes. Venerable One, look. That's the Tuoba family's flag. We're saved. Chapter 494. While the remnants of Tiandu were struggling to resist Qin Shi's attack, Tabague's cry of "We are saved" was no less exciting than a stimulant. Hearing this, Emperor Yuhuan hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction Tabague was pointing, only to see dozens of star carts flying over at an extremely fast speed. When these starships approached, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw the flag of the Tuoba family hanging high on the mast of the main ship. The flag was very exquisite and was definitely not ordinary. There were 2 words written on it, and the flag was embroidered with seawater patterns and clouds. It seemed to imply that the Tuoba family had a long and prosperous history. The reinforcements Tabague had been waiting for. They had finally arrived. There were a total of 24 starships that came to support. When they were about to approach the location of Tabague's group, these starships immediately took the lead with the main ship, and the rest split into 2 sides and spread out in a goose formation. Looking at their momentum, there was a faint air of military formation. Seeing this, Qin Shi temporarily withdrew his true essence and then quietly floated in the void, as if he wanted to see why this group of people had come. Your Excellency is Mr. Chun? Tuoba Yi is here. Greetings, sir. After the starship stopped, a figure flew out at an extremely fast speed, and then went straight to Qin Shi. The 2 faced each other in space. Qin Shi sized up the other party, and the other party sized him up at the same time. This man who claimed to be the head of the Tuoba family had a cultivation base around the middle stage of divine transformation, which should be at the same level as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Perhaps because he knew that his cultivation base was far lower than Qin Shi. As soon as Tuoba Yi appeared, he took the initiative to respectfully greet Qin Shi. Qin Shi naturally knew why Tuoba Yi had come. Therefore, he didn't even bother to waste time with the other party. After waving his hand indifferently, Qin Shi said coldly, "Since I have chased you all the way here today, I have already made it clear that I will never let this matter go. Get out of the way. You can't stop me." After saying that, Qin Shi's figure disappeared from Tuoba Yi's sight. By the time Tuoba Yi came back to his senses, Qin Shi had already caught up with the dilapidated Xingqia in front of him, and continued to demolish it. Bang! When the sword light emitted by Qin Shi once again collided with the large array, a strong wave of true essence instantly set off in the void. At that moment, the joy of seeing the reinforcements immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. Even though the Tuoba family's reinforcements had arrived, the situation didn't seem to have improved. Qin Shi was still attacking the formation. Everyone was still struggling to hold on under his attacks. Inside the array, Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others looked at the sky with stern expressions. At this point, they could only place all their hopes on Tuoba Yi. They could only hope that everything was as Tuoba Gue said, that the Tuoba family was willing to offend a supreme in exchange for the alliance of the entire Heaven Capital. Otherwise, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only use his own method to deal with the catastrophe in front of him. Mr. Chen, can you stop and listen to me? Chen Shi's reaction was completely out of Tuoba Ye's expectations. It was true that Chen Shi was a supreme. However, Tuoba Ye was not bad either. As the leader of the Tuoba family, Tuoba Ye represented the entire Tuoba family's will. Seeing Chen Shi's unreasonable and ruthless way of doing things, it seemed that he didn't put him in his eyes at all. Tuoba Ye's face darkened, and he had to quickly change his plan. Thus, he came in front of Chen Shi again and suddenly opened his arms, as if he wanted to stop Chen Shi from continuing to attack Xingcha. You want to die? Seeing this, Chen Shi did not hesitate. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the array again. Not to mention Tuoba Ye, even if the entire Tuoba family stood in front of him today, he would still eat Yuhuan Tianzuan alive. There was no way to talk. There was really no way to talk. Seeing that Chen Shi was treating him like he didn't exist, Tuoba Ye seemed to be a little angry. Thus, Tuoba Ye's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of fierceness, and then he took out a fan-like thing from his arms. Swoosh! As soon as this magic treasure was taken out, Chen Shi noticed a trace of unusual energy fluctuation from it. He originally left some leeway, intending to give Tuoba Ye a chance to stay out of this. But since Tuoba Ye was so unappreciative, then don't blame him for being merciless. Therefore, the moment Tuoba Ye took out the folding fan, the long sword in Chen Shi's hand suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and then with an unparalleled power, it directly slashed at Tuoba Ye in front of him. Bang! There was no air in space, so naturally, sound couldn't be transmitted. With a flash of light, a strong shock wave with true essence as the medium suddenly spread out. Wherever the shock wave went, the meteorites immediately turned into dust and completely disappeared in this vast universe. The star Cha where the people of Tiandu were on was closest to the explosion, so the impact of this star Cha was naturally the strongest. Under such a huge impact, this star Cha was shaken and rolled quickly. After rolling for thousands of meters away, it was under the control of Tuoba Gue that the ship stabilized. Even with the protection of the array, Star Cha was blown away by the explosion, and Tuoba Ye, who took Chen Shi's sword head-on, seemed to be fine. So when the true essence Qi gradually stabilized, Tuoba Ye gently waved the folding fan in his hand, and then smiled at Chen Shi with a confident face. Mr. Chen, can we have a good talk now? Hearing this, Chen Shi's eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light. A mere mid-divine transformation realm cultivator could rely on this fan to block his full-strength attack, and he was not affected at all. This meant that the folding fan in front of him should be the life treasure of a supreme being, and this supreme being was not far away. Thinking of this, Chen Shi immediately closed his eyes and began to carefully observe everything around him. Supreme being. Cave void. Sure enough, everything was as he expected. Wasn't there a tiny space crack on the Tuoba family's main ship? Pretending to be mysterious. Chen Shi snorted angrily. When he opened his eyes again, a golden light suddenly burst out from his eyes, shooting straight toward the crack. But the moment Chen Shi's eyes shot out the golden light, a slightly old voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. Ha 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 ha. Fellow Taoist, don't be angry. This old man will show himself. As soon as the voice fell, an old man with white hair and beard appeared in front of Chen Shi out of thin air. And at this time, when Tuoba Ye saw the old man appear, he immediately held up the folding fan with both hands, and respectfully returned it to the old man. Tuoba Ye greets Spiritual Master Void Pierce stage. Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Chen Shi, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yuhuan Tianzuan's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Tiandu able to withstand Chen Shi's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Chunxi's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuoba Yi, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Chen Shi's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Chen Shi immediately understood why Tuoba Yi could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Daoist Master Chongshu's natal magic treasure. Daoist Master Chongshu himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Chen Shi, because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane. Even Chen Shi could not discover his existence immediately. Daoist Master Chongshu? After hearing Tuoba Ye's words, Chen Shi could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, "You are not a member of Tuoba family?" Hearing this, Daoist Master Chongshu chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Chen Shi's face. "My name is Master Chongshu. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven." Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Chen Shi had long heard of this name from Changhua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Chen Shi immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Chen Shi. Tuoba Yi was very smart, but he was also very greedy. Just like Tabague. This was human nature. The moment Tuoba Yi received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tabague. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Chen Shi was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuoba Yi made up his mind and took the initiative to find Immortal Chongshu, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Chongshu appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Haha. Why did Immortal Chongshu come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Chen Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. "Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken." Before his voice fell, Chen Shi turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of Immortal Chongshu. At this time, Tuoba Yi on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void, and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuoba Yi feel very proud of taking Chen Shi's sword head-on just now? Therefore, Chen Shi wanted to see if Tuoba Yi could still be proud now. Chi. A cold light flashed, and Tuoba Yi suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Chen Shi actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Daoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, an extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Yi's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique, a sword hiding in the void. This sudden turn of events caused Daoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful Void Realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Chen Shi had the upper hand, Immortal Chongshu had no time to rescue him. Arrogant. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Chongshu let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Chen Shi. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Chen Shi had no intention of fighting with Immortal Chengxiu. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke! Everyone was at the insightful emptiness, who could do anything to who. Chen Shi couldn't kill Immortal Chengxiu, just like how Immortal Chengxiu couldn't kill him. But although Chen Shi could not do anything to Reverend Chengsu, he could completely abandon Reverend Chengsu and turn his attention to Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Chengxiu made his move, Chen Shi didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xingqiao again and continued his forceful demolition. Peng, peng, peng. Chen Shi flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Chengxiu chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of you chase me around Xingqiao. However, the long sword in Chen Shi's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no gold core realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over, the great formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment Tabague, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable! We have arrived at Supreme Palace Enclosure." Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop." Ah! Tabague seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Fly to where? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace Enclosure. Why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Chen Shi was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State." "Then go to Central State, quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace Enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace Enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, a dilapidated large Xingqiao appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xingqiao seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gates formation, it directly landed in the square. Boom! With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xingqiao finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. Who is it? Who dares to break into the Jade Clear Paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the Elder of Imparting Arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xingqiao in the middle of the martial arts practice field. Bang! At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened, and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shockwaves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xingcha. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the jade clear grotto heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of jade clear grotto heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting Elder's sight. This is Tongxian Nanhua and Dongling. Elder technique imparting Elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening Nanhua Dongling. If a void pierce stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the jade clear heavenly grotto heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the jade clear grotto heaven was about to face a great calamity. Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xingcha's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Wasn't Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xingcha ship that suddenly fell into the jade clear grotto heaven? Under Chun Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the jade clear grotto heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xingcha, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Chun Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the jade clear grotto heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerable, this Xingcha has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tabague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan, with a terrified expression. One should know that just now, he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Chun Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Chun Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Chun Shi didn't even give face to Taoist Master Void Pierce stage, and was determined to kill them today, Tabague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the heaven's pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Taoist Master Void Pierce stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Chun Shi wanted to chase after him. Taoist Master Void Pierce stage wanted to stop him. If Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't run, Chun Shi would kill him. If Chun Shi didn't kill him, how could the heart demon oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Taoist Master Void Pierce stage couldn't stop Chun Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tabague's question, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable. Venerable? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer, Tabague had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xingcha meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tabague was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzuan might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tabague was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Chun Shi and the 4 Taoist masters. They saw. Chun Shi stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field, facing the remains of Xingcha. The four Taoist masters stood in the four corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Chen Shi. Although Chen Shi was surrounded by the four Taoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face, like a hunter who was preparing to capture his prey from a trap. Even if he was surrounded, Chen Shi's attention wasn't on the four Taoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Chen Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the four Taoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Taoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Chen Shi was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The four Taoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Chen Shi just looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then at this moment, Chen Shi was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Chen Shi's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Chen Shi was smiling. So he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Chen Shi. But that smile, it obviously looked a little forced. Some choices once made can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Chen Shi was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the four Taoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Chen Shi might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Chen Shi really forced Yuhuan Tianzuan into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? So as long as Chen Shi was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Chen Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, "Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried?" At this point, Chen Shi suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, "What a pity, what a pity. You are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy. Am I right?" Chen Shi's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Chen Shi might care a lot about the mortals on earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Chen Shi's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Chen Shi in such a brutal way, perhaps Chen Shi might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Chen Shi's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth, and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the four great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Chunxi's attitude. The four great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the great formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the great formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the great formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Chun? Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Chunxi and said, "This old man knows his mistake." Chunxi did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. If Chunxi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yuhuan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All three parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these three bottom lines were not touched. Back to Chunxi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Chunxi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aot Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Chunxi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Chunxi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Chunxi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Chunxi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Chunxi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Chunxi could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Aot Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Chunxi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Chunxi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Aot Nebula was simply too big, by the time Chunxi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Chunxi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Chunxi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school, she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye, that cute little girl back then, she was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nian Nian was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past? I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me." As she spoke, Nian picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air, and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Ruoying hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the big cat. And as she grew older, Chunxi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nian's height had already reached 1.2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Chunxi not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. "Mom, I'm going to find Wanwan and Mingming to play." After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Changhua and Yiji would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the 3 little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade, or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time, there were no exquisite toys. Among the children, there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today, and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity, with the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called My Little Friends in primary school Chinese. With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Chunxi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. Splash! With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. Nian, look. I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the 2 brothers immediately shouted happily. However, When Nian Nian saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. "Big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold." As she spoke, Nian Nian reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. "Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold, I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right?" After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Nian Nian began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time, they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Nian Nian, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Chen Shi wasn't by her side today, Nian Nian still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. "You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Chun, you're so lucky. I'm so envious." Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Chen Shi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Chen Shi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Nian Nian was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Chen Shi didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Although he only taught Nian Nian how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian Nian's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian Nian wouldn't be able to play with the two brothers anymore. And this was also the fundamental reason why Chen Shi had always been opposed to letting Nian Nian cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian Nian a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, "Hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix." Was Chen Shi really different from those flirtatious B*****s? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Chen Shi could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian Nian really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the second grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Chen Shi still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were two sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Chen Shi and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. "Nian Nian, tell Daddy, do you want to skip a grade?" Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand what Chen Shi meant. Seeing this, Chen Shi patiently explained to her. "The teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the second grade. You can go directly to the third grade and study with the third grade brothers and sisters. Nian Nian, do you want to go?" Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. "Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions." The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Chunxi to let Nian skip a grade. To Chunxi, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Chunxi was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully. You're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Chunxi led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards, she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Chunxi saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at Teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Chunxi's mind turned, and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year, a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades. Chunxi turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Hearing this, Chunxi instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I? When? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. Dad is shameless. The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Chunxi. Mr. Chen, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it? Chunxi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this, and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Chunxi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me. Chapter 502. The little girl's third-grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to second-grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Chunxi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of third-grade class 2. The form teacher of third-grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment Teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. "Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack." Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. "Oh, this child is so sensible. You're called Chen, right? I like you." It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into third grade class 2. The third-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. "Come everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Chen Yan. Everyone welcome." After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li. Looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage, she suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason. So much so that her little face slightly tensed up. "Chen Yan skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you. But her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen Yan's elder brother and sister, you should." Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Chen Shi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Chen Shi had already said that there was no need for 2 people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Nian to school as something that she had to do every day. "Ying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you." Before he arrived, Chen Shi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently. "I won't go shopping today, let's go home first. I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you." "Ask." Hearing this, Chen Shi was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, "What's the relationship between the two of us? Do you still need to use the word ask?" Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him, and did not say anything. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not feel offended at all. Instead, he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Chen Shi gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating, she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Chen Shi. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Chen Shi. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Ying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the Sai courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Chen Shi pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Changhua and Yiji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the two of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Qin didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Qin didn't intend to interrupt them, Changhua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Qin, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Qin had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Chenghua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Qin's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the West Wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Changhua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Changhua was shocked by Qin's bad attitude, but after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Qin and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xianyuan Changhua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Qin wouldn't agree, so Changhua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Qin eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Qin did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Xueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion, and directly came to ask for his approval. Qin did not speak, but Changhua was a little anxious. So he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Chenghua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Qin laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Qin's words, Chenghua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Qin's character. Oh no! Mr. Qin was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Changhua immediately changed his strategy. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Nian, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know, there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Qin was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Qin's worldview was greatly impacted, but on second thought, he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally, they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.